talks about every game.
Hey, welcome to my new series Every Game, where I talk about every video game in a series all in one video. It's not just a review of the games, but also a bit of the development history as well. Before we start, I want to give a big shout out to the Shenmue Dojo forums and the Shenmue United Discord server for helping me a bit with this video. And also a special shout out to 24 Nathan on the Shenmue Dojo forums for going out of his way to help provide information and materials for this video. And also a shout out to the Shenmue Dojo admin Spud1897 who talked to me personally to help sort out some information, so thanks everyone. Shenmue. I feel like this is a divisive series online. Some people love it and some people hate it.
Shenmue is dreadful. I don't think that's a particularly brave thing to say, but I believe I should get a medal for saying it anyway.
Me though, I love it. I didn't play it back in the day though. I first played Shenmue when the remasters of the first two games came out on PC. It was a slow burn at first, but eventually the game really started to pull me in. Never before had I played a game with such a huge attention to detail and a real desire to make the world feel believable and alive, as well as making the player interact with the world as if it was a real location and not just a level in a video game. If you want to know where you are or where to go, you have to find a map and look at it. There's no quest markers or waypoints, so if you don't know who to talk to or what to do, you have to ask people around you for help. There's a day-night cycle with an in-game clock, a weather system that isn't random as each calendar day has its own pre-programmed weather. NPCs have their own schedule, they all have their own names, and all of them have backstories. You have to actually wait for the bus as well. This is the most thrilling gameplay of all time. Oh, and there's some fighting as well sometimes. And all of it was accomplished on the Sega Dreamcast in 1999. December 29th, 1999, so barely in 1999, but still. And the game would end up being one of the most expensive video games ever made at the time, costing around 47 to 70 million US dollars. Adjusting for inflation, that's around 80 to 120 million dollars today. Along with 250 to 300 people on the development team, an unheard of amount of people to be working on a game in the mid-90s. So what's the history here, and does it still hold up? If you want to start at the very beginning, you have to talk about the man behind the game, Yu Suzuki. First joining Sega in 1983, he would go on to be described as a Shigeru Miyamoto of Sega. Everything he touched turned to gold. And while Miyamoto would quickly abandon the arcade after he worked on hit games like Donkey Kong and Mario Bros., Yu Suzuki would remain working primarily on arcade games for a majority of his time at Sega. And so many of Sega's arcade hits were under his leadership. You got Space Harrier, Hang On, Outrun, Afterburner, Virtua Racing, Virtua Fighter, Virtua Cop, Daytona USA, and Sonic the Fighters. Yep, even this one. See, look, there he is. The man could do no wrong. To say he was a respected Sega employee would be an understatement. But of course, Yu Suzuki didn't make these games single-handedly. He had a very talented team that worked under the name of Sega AM2. So how did a team that primarily made arcade games end up making a massive console exclusive? Well, you have to start in 1994, when Yu Suzuki took a research trip to China for, I believe, Virtua Fighter 2. It was initially thought that he took this trip for the first Virtua Fighter game, but the timeline doesn't add up as that game came out in 1993, and also the first Virtua Fighter had a lot to be desired in terms of depicting real-world locations, to say the least. So it makes sense that with the sequel there was a desire to make it look like these fights were taking place in real-world locations. If for some reason you care about the nitty-gritty details about what exactly Suzuki did and saw during his trip to China, then I recommend visiting PhantomRiverstone.com. They have a great multi-part blog all about his trip that I'll put a link to in the description. But basically, yeah, the dude went to China, and it seems to have had a big impact on him as Chinese culture would be center stage in his upcoming magnum opus. In 1995, for some reason, Yu Suzuki wanted to work on a console game. This was something he had done before, with Sword of Vermilion on the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive, which was an action role-playing game released in 1989 in Japan and 1991 in North America and Europe. There was also Fighters Mega Mix, released for the Sega Saturn in 1996, a crossover fighting game exclusive to the system, which was released while what would become Shenmue had just started being worked on in that same year. You can also play as a Daytona USA car. I just thought you'd like to know that. It's also the worst fighter in the game as far as I can tell, which is odd considering cars are usually pretty good at hurting people. Yeah. Anyway, Yu Suzuki wanted to make a console game, an RPG to be precise, taking inspiration partly from JRPGs, but primarily from old Western adventure games from the 80s like Mystery House. Adventure games were, at the time, one of the few genres that really gave the player freedom to do whatever they wanted in terms of how they interacted with characters in the world. Because they were primarily text-based, it was easy enough to program in scenarios for whatever the player wanted to do. There were limitations for sure, but it was far and away the most player agency you could get in a game at the time. Yu Suzuki wanted to take that aspect, mix it in with some light RPG elements, as well as craft a highly detailed and believable world. It would basically be an open world game, but this was before that term was coined, so instead, Yu Suzuki called this style of game free, which stood for Full Reactive Eyes Entertainment. It didn't catch on. So in 1995, Yu Suzuki created a prototype for the Sega Saturn called The Old Man and the Peach Tree that took place in 1950s China. It allows you to run around in a world with high detail like animals and NPCs roaming around that you could talk to. It was essentially the building blocks for what would later be seen in Shenmue. There's unfortunately no footage of this prototype, but no doubt it would have been impressive for the hardware. The Saturn wasn't really known for pushing polygons very well compared to its rivals, and it was still early days for 3D gaming. For some context, 1995 was still a year before the release of the Nintendo 64 and Mario 64, and Yu Suzuki had already made a prototype for a fully 3D game with NPCs you could talk to, complete with facial animations. It was groundbreaking stuff. Work began properly in 1996 to turn the prototype into a full game. It would be called Virtua Fighter RPG Akira's Story, and would be a game all about the backstory of Akira from the Virtua Fighter series. It's also at this point that fighting game mechanics are incorporated into the design of the game, with the player being able to engage in fights with people. I think it's worth noting how the idea of getting into fights wasn't part of the design at the very start with the Old Man prototype, at least as far as I know, and I think that tidbit is worth holding on to. Work began proper on the game, still targeting a release on the Sega Saturn, although this was a very ambitious game for the hardware, and it soon became clear that the Saturn wasn't up to the task, so they scrapped everything they had and started anew. Not for the Dreamcast, no. This time they were working with a modified Sega Saturn, one that had a bit more power than the original. Yeah, I don't see this mentioned very often when people talk about the original Saturn version of Shenmue. The fact that progress was scrapped twice, both for the jump to the upgraded Saturn and then again for the jump to the Dreamcast. Most people, even in the Shenmue community, don't usually know that this footage you've been looking at could be running on an unreleased, upgraded Sega Saturn. Here is an excerpt from a video interview with IGN Japan in 2019 when Keiji Okuyasu was asked about the time Shenmue's development shifted to the Dreamcast. That was tough, reflects Okuyasu. He explains that in fact this would be its second remake. The team had already remade it once in order to run on a Saturn that had been specially expanded with an acceleration board. Then a while after that, we were told that a new console would be coming out, so to move on to that, we were like, "Are you serious?" he says with a rueful chuckle. Thanks again to PhantomRiverstone.com who originally provided that translation. Their article regarding this interview will also be in the description. Now, there's some speculation that the upgraded Saturn that Okuyasu mentioned may be the cancelled Sega Black Belt. This console was being made in collaboration with 3DFX and was set to be Sega's next-gen console before being scrapped and replaced by the Dreamcast. But outside of the console being given the name the Saturn II, either by Sega or the gaming press, it really seems like the Black Belt was a brand new console made from the ground up and couldn't really be described as an upgraded Saturn. It would have used a dedicated 3D acceleration card, which would result in much better graphical fidelity than we see in the Shenmue Saturn footage, which still looks like it could be running on a standard Saturn. And to top it off, the Black Belt was reportedly a 64-bit machine, with the Saturn being 32-bit, pretty much confirming that this was an entirely different beast. So it would seem to me that this Shenmue Saturn footage is either from a base Sega Saturn, or an obscure, slightly upgraded Saturn, but not the Black Belt, and what Okuyasu was referring to when he mentioned an upgraded Saturn was likely not the Black Belt. However, this is all just speculation. Anyway, let's get back to our timeline. The game still wouldn't be announced during this stage of development, not until development had already switched to the Dreamcast, with this footage here being included as a bonus in the Xbox version of Shenmue 2, and to this day is the only footage of Shenmue running on a Saturn that's been made available to the public. And so finally, Shenmue as we would know it would begin to take shape on the Dreamcast, starting with the name. Virtua Fighter RPG would now be called Shenmue, with the main character now being named Ryo instead of Akira. Outside of this, Ryo is still, even in the final game, a spitting image of a young Akira from Virtua Fighter, and the game's story would remain largely unchanged. When Virtua Fighter 3 TB was released in Japan for the Dreamcast on November 27, 1998, it included a bonus disc called Project Berkeley. The disc contained a movie sequence announcing the project to the world for the first time. It shows off a lot of early concept video and images of Shenmue, a lot of it from when the game was still Virtua Fighter RPG, although by this point in development, at least from what I can gather, the game had already changed to become Shenmue. Then, a little under a month later, on December 20th, 1998, Shenmue would be officially revealed to the public at the Yokohama International Assembly Hall. Those who couldn't attend the event could watch it online. Yes, online in 1998. That's why the video you are watching currently has like 5 pixels. It is to this day the only footage of the initial Shenmue reveal that exists, and it's almost completely unintelligible. I think this event may have been live streamed too, but I couldn't confirm that. It certainly looks like it could be a live stream from 1998 though. I did find this footage though, which attempts to clean up the original footage a bit, as well as pick little bits of footage from other sources that match up, so I'll be showing that from now on. People were interested in one key feature of the game shown off at the event, QTEs, or Quick Timer Events. Shenmue was probably the first game to implement QTEs almost exactly as they would be used in lots of future games, while also coining the term. Although while Shenmue calls them Quick Timer Events, that would quickly be changed by other games to be called a Quick Time Event instead. I found an old IGN article talking about this reveal, and it's so strange to see the gaming press having to explain what a QTE is, given how familiar we all are with the concept today. Finally, Sega shows off the game's Quick Timer Event QTE mode. QTEs are pre-programmed action sequences that require occasional timed responses, similar to the between-level cutscenes in Die Hard Arcade, Dynamite Decker. Screens of the game reveal a beautiful graphical display as characters run about through the game's environment. Occasionally, the image of a button will appear on screen, and the player has to press the corresponding button within a few moments in order to successfully complete an action. The article later goes on to say, hardcore Sega fans swoon. Spammers post countless messages to Sega message boards, dooming Sega to a fiery grave dug by Suzuki himself. It seems that in the assuming eyes of the gaming internet community, the QTE mode is a dagger that will destroy the game. So even in 1998, people were not happy with the concept of the QTE, but the game certainly impressed, at least to those who could make it out, and soon a release date would be announced, the 5th of August, 1999. However, there would be a delay, pushing the game back to October 28th. Everyone who pre-ordered Shenmue in Japan would be in for a surprise though. To apologize for the delay, on the 5th of August, the day Shenmue was originally supposed to release, people would receive the What's Shenmue demo, allowing them to play a small slice of the Shenmue experience ahead of the new release date. And since this series is all about being thorough, let's take a look at this Japan-exclusive early demo. Now, since this was only available in Japan, it's only in Japanese. However, the Shenmue community eventually came together and released a fan translation mod that allows you to play with English subtitles, which is what I'll be using. Thanks guys. You might be wondering why anyone bothered to translate a demo into English, and the reason is that this isn't an ordinary demo. Instead of just letting people play a small slice of the final game, What's Shenmue follows an entirely original story. To be fair, it's extremely short, but it is entirely unique to this demo. So here we go, What's Shenmue? Find Director Yukawa. Who's Director Yukawa? Well, Hidekazu Yukawa was the senior managing director of Sega of Japan during the Dreamcast era, and over in Japan he ended up somehow being the face of the Dreamcast, appearing in a handful of commercials, and even having his face on the box the Dreamcast came in. I might as well play you one of the ads in full since they're pretty short, courtesy of Jim Ballard on YouTube.
その日、セガエンタープライゼス専務湯川秀和は驚くべき街の声を耳にした。セガなんてダッセよな。プレステの方が面白いよな。
そうなのか。なんてこった。止めてくれ。一人になりたいんだ。くそ。
セガなんてダッセよな。
ちょ。うるせえ。ごめんなさいよ。
おかえりなさい。どうなさったの？
立つんだ、湯川専務。
Jim has uploaded 8 of these ads on YouTube, which is probably all of them. They are worth a watch as they can be kinda funny and they end up following a bit of a storyline. But anyway, all you need to know is the actual senior managing director of Sega Japan became sort of a mascot for the Dreamcast, which is context you kind of need in order to make sense of this demo. Someone's after Mr. Yukawa. Find him before 7 PM. Alright, let's do this. Yoshio Goto asked me to find Mr. Yukawa by 7 PM. Who is Yoshio Goto, you ask? I don't know, you tell me. I've tried my best and it seems no one, at least on the English-speaking internet, has ever heard of them, so if you think you know who this is, please let me know. I I think it's either an obscure co-worker of Yukawa or maybe a beta name of one of the Shenmue characters. I've honestly got no idea. Mr. Yukawa is in Dobuita. He has the disc for Dreamcast's latest game. Someone's after that disc. Yukawa's look, grey suit and gold glasses. Sounds simple enough. So the demo starts and we get a cutscene of Yo asking Tom if he's seen Yukawa. Tom suggests that they split up to look for him, and reminds Yo to use his notebook to keep track of his leads. Well, he just bolted. Okay. And now we can control Yo. You can tell this is a beta version of Shenmue because we have a crouching button. Yeah, you can make Yo crouch with the press of a button, something that isn't in the final game. It serves no purpose in the demo, and I don't know what the intended purpose ever was for it. The animation is used in the final game though, when Yo crouches down to interact with the kitten. Hey, this guy looks different. He says he doesn't know Yukawa, but old lady Tokusan that Ida Flores might know. Thanks, former Chinese guy. Hey, the tomato store is coming soon. Does that mean the store hasn't opened up yet in universe, thus meaning this demo takes place before the events of the first game? No, we'll get to that later. Man, all this talking about Shenmue has made me thirsty. I could sure go for a registered trademark Coca-Cola. Branded drinks appeared in the final version of Shenmue as well, but exclusive to the Japanese version, but they still look a bit different here. Yeah, I think Ryo is a Sprite guy. Shenmue, everybody. So Tokusan is out, but Nozomi says she thinks she saw someone matching Yukawa's description at Suzume Park. Well, let's get over there then. Wait, where is the park again?
公園ってどっちでしたっけ？
公園なら札幌ゲームセンターの横を入ったところにあるよ。
Awesome, thanks guy. I don't see Yukawa anywhere. Let's talk to this guy.
すいません。
はい。
湯川って人を探してるんですが、ここにメガネでグレーのスーツの人来ませんでしたか？
ああ、その方なら
Really?
いましたよ。
ここにその人が。
ええ、先ほどその方に助けていただいたんです。
助けてもらった？
ええ、私がゴロツキどもに絡まれた時、その人が間に入ってくれたんです。
Damn, Yukawa is a badass. I'm sure Yukawa is glad he didn't have to beat anyone to a bloody pulp in front of an audience. Wouldn't be good for his reputation. That and he gets to keep hiding his power level for a bit longer.
何事もなく済みました。いやー、今時珍しく勇敢な方ですな。
その後どっち行ったかわかりますか？
さあ、ゲームセンターの方に歩いて行きましたが。
Alright, let's go to the arcade. No capsule machines out front though. I don't think they were in the game yet. Wait, Afterburner? We wouldn't see Afterburner playable until Shenmue 2, and even then it's a different style cabinet. Unfortunately, none of the classic Sega arcade games are available in the demo, or even QTE Title or Excite QTE. Instead, we have darts and a slot machine. Wait, a slot machine? Yeah, originally there was going to be a slot machine in the arcade, until it was decided later to make a dedicated slot house location. It isn't just here for the demo, pre-release footage also shows the slot machine inside the arcade. Also the darts is different too. It plays exactly like how Neo Darts plays in the final game, the darts you can play at the Harbour Lounge, meaning that Neo Darts is how darts used to work until they changed it and then made the old darts minigame into Neo Darts. I do think the change was for the better though. Neo Darts kinda sucks. Also the hang-on machine looks a little different and the screen is showing the night level. Anyway, enough fooling around, we're looking for Yukawa.
すいません。湯川って人を探してるんですが。ああ、湯川さんならここに来たよ。本当ですか？うん。
Business card, huh?
その名刺見せてくれませんか？まあいいよ。
Something written on the back, you say? Yeah, so the demo does something interesting that never happens in the final game, or even in any of the sequels. You have to look at the business card and flip it over to reveal a clue. Now in all Shenmue games you can look at any item in your inventory and rotate the model and such, but it never plays a role in progression. You never have to look at any object in your inventory. But not in this demo, it's a requirement. Well, it's not actually a requirement, but we'll get to that. It makes me wonder if anything like this was ever planned for the final game. 4 PM, Asia Travel Company, let's go. But before that, let's go explore the rest of Dobuita.
ごめんね。お試しソフトじゃここまでな。
Oh,
兄ちゃん、そこまでだ。お試しソフトはそこまでだよ。
oh, okay. Yeah, you only get access to Dobuita in this demo, and not even all of it. The entire Bar district is off limits along with a few other streets. This is a very small slice of Shenmue. Oh boy, QTE time. Now this may just be me, but I swear the timing on QTEs, at least in this sequence, feels a bit stricter than the final game. Sometimes I press the button as soon as I can react and I'm still barely too late. See, I failed. That never happens to me in the normal game. But whatever, it's the same buttons every time, so it's far from impossible.
Yukawa って人知らないか？メガネかけててグレーのスーツの人だ。
その人ならさっき見ました。本当です。
どこでだ？
アジア旅行者に入っていきました。
Asia Travel Company. I already knew that. There he is.
Yukawa さんですね。
まさか。
I'm sure he's only running because he doesn't want to hurt Yo. He could win in a fight if he wanted to. Of course, this QTE sequence is in the final game as well, but you don't chase Yukawa, so it's worse.
Yukawa さん、これだ。
Oh boy, buddy, I'd just take off running if I were you. You don't know what Yukawa is capable of. There we go, Hidori getting his hands dirty so Yukawa doesn't have to.
君は一体ある人物からあなたを守ってくれと頼まれたんです。
頼まれた？一体誰から？もしかして君が葉月君か？
俺に頼んだのは後藤義雄。
Yeah, Yoshio Goto, whoever that is.
後藤義雄か。いやー助かった。これでシェンムーを発売できる。
シェンムー。
You know those cop-out endings where you find out everything is just a dream? You do? Good. Now you know why this demo isn't canon. And there we have it, that's the demo. My playthrough where I did and saw pretty much everything there is only took me around 20 minutes. But really you can end up finishing a bit quicker. Way quicker if you don't count leaving the game idle as time spent playing. You see, you don't have to do pretty much anything I did in my playthrough in order to see the ending. If you do completely fail to find Yukawa by 7 PM, Ryo will mention to himself that he failed and you get kicked back to the title screen. But all you have to do to see the ending is try to enter Asia Travel Company after 4 PM. That's it. You can run over there right away, leave the game idle until it's 4 PM or later, trigger the QTE sequence and beat it, and there you go, you've beaten the demo. So you don't have to flip over the business card, and you can also learn to head to Asia Travel Company from the Bully QTE event. So if for some reason you decided to follow a walkthrough for this demo, you would walk away thinking the game was pretty bad. More on that later. But wait, there is a bit more to this demo. Let's go into information. Here some of the game's characters will teach you about certain aspects of the game. These would also be included in the final game on the passport disc. And wow, look at these graphics, like damn, imagine seeing this running on your Dreamcast in August of 1999. Nothing else came close to looking this good. Of course the game cheats a little bit. These models are exclusively used for these sequences, and are made possible because the characters are only modeled down to the upper body, along with being separate from gameplay so no other aspects of the game need to be loaded into memory. The Dreamcast can focus solely on the highly detailed face and simple background. Regardless, this is really impressive. The ears are fully modeled instead of being a flat texture, something you wouldn't see during gameplay in other games until around the 360 and PS3 era, and even then most games still wouldn't bother with it. The eyes also look great, with a simple reflection trick that makes it really stand out. And to prove that this is being rendered in real time, the game lets you take control of the camera, moving it left to right and zooming in and out, along with being able to change where the light source is. You can't look up or down though, since that would reveal that the character isn't fully modelled. Overall, this demo does a great job of showing off what Shenmue is about, and also how hard they were pushing the hardware. Unlike some demos which made people not want to purchase the full game, this demo I'm sure made most people hold on to their pre-order. Also notice how, although Ryo talks about the game's combat in his information section, the demo didn't actually feature any combat, as if it wasn't a core part of the game worth showing off. Hold on to that. So a bit of an aside, literally while I was editing the Watch Shenmue section of this video, news broke that Hidekazu Yukawa died last year in 2021 of aspiration pneumonia at the age of 78, and yeah, that sucks. But to try and look at the bright side, he's immortalized in these games now, and he left behind a legacy of, you know, being this mascot when he didn't need to be. He could have just been a faceless executive type person, but he decided, you know, I'll do these commercials, I'll do this voice acting for these cameos and stuff, and yeah, he's immortalized in these things now, and that's cool as well. So it's sad that he's gone, but you know, I think he probably lived a good life. He also does cameo in the final game. There's 2 toys of him in the Abe store, and having both of them also contributes to cameos where he appears in the sushi restaurant and at the bar. I think the bar one is exclusive to the Japanese version, but yeah, he's in the final game as well. So after the release of the demo, the game would continue to target the new release date, October 28th. Now I'm not sure exactly when, but at some point the game would end up being delayed again, this time to December 29th, 1999. You might be able to tell from that release date that they were hell-bent on not releasing in the year 2000, and there's a reason for that. A lot of the marketing was centered around the year 1999. You can even see that in the demo's ending. The poster in Yukawa's office says, 1999, RPG has changed, and that was the game's actual marketing slogan, along with just a big emphasis on the year 1999. So if Shenmue didn't release within the year, Sega would have egg on their face, hence the game's actual final release date in Japan, only a few days before New Year's. Do you guys smell the captain? I sure do. Enter Toshihiro Nagoshi. Wait, that's what he looks like today. Let's get a picture of him from around our timeline. There we go. Nagoshi was initially a supervisor on Shenmue, but later became dissatisfied with the project and asked for his own development division at Sega. He would get it. First known as AM11, but today is known as Yu Ga Gotoku Studios, or Like a Dragon Studios. They are primarily known for the Yakuza series. However, during the early days of AM11, the CEO of Sega told Nagoshi that he wanted him back on the Shenmue project as both the producer and director. He knew that Nagoshi was the only person that Yu Suzuki fully trusted, and the game needed to be finished before the turn of the millennium, and without Yu Suzuki's involvement. Due to the almost infinite budget and continuously moving deadline, anything Yu Suzuki wanted to add to the game during development, even if it wasn't part of the original plan, could be added. To the point where the Yokosuka section of the game, which was supposed to be a very small part of the game before Ryo sails out to China, ended up becoming big enough to encapsulate the entire first game. With China, the location where the game was meant to truly begin, left until the second entry in the series. This is why so much of Shenmue 1's early coverage is centered around China, including a majority of the Saturn footage. The player was only going to spend a small amount of time in Japan, but the scope of the game kept increasing, including this early section. Going back to that IGN Japan interview from earlier, Yu Suzuki said this: "We worked on Shenmue 2 at the same time as Shenmue 1. At first, we didn't intend to finish the first game at Yokosuka. We had been prepared to go through to Guilin, but it kept growing and growing. Keep in mind Guilin is where Shenmue 2 ended." Sega managing director Hisashi Suzuki once stated in a 2012 interview, "One time, Nagoshi came to me and said, if things go on as they are, Shenmue's development will go on forever. Let's stop him." In a 2018 interview with Games Radar, Nagoshi said this about Shenmue: "We really could not see the end of Shenmue, and I was called by our CEO at the time. He said to me, please get this game finished. So I was a producer and director for the final months of the project. I'd reviewed the whole project, looking at what kind of plan they had and the remaining workload. It took me more than a month to understand what was going on." He goes on to say, "The CEO asked me how much time would be needed, and I told him 6 months. Myself and the programmer and designer I most trusted called the whole team and told them we had to finish the game in 6 months. We did it, but it was a tough and bitter project for me. Suzuki-san also knew he had to finish the game soon, whatever the final result. He's the kind of person that, if he wants to do more, cannot stop himself, so someone must be there to do it for him. Our CEO knew that I was the only person he would listen to. Hard as it was to be asked to do it, I knew why it had to be me. There's only one reason for why the project turned into such a panic. Suzuki had been creating arcade games for so long and didn't write planning documents, but for console games, you have to have a blueprint, and it was such a big project. Now, I've been trying to piece together a timeline to figure out exactly when Nagoshi took over on Shenmue, and if we go by what he said in this interview, when he was brought on board, he told the CEO he would get the game finished in 6 months, and that they succeeded in doing so. I'm not sure if he told the CEO he could finish the game in 6 months before or after he spent a month understanding what was going on, but we'll operate under the assumption that it was before, for simplicity's sake, but you can assume a 1 month margin of error. 6 months before release was June 1999, 2 months before the initial August release date, and perhaps when the first delay would be announced, and when the project was taken away from Suzuki. But what confuses me is that second delay from October 28th to December 29th. If Nagoshi said they would get the game done in 6 months and then succeeded, why was there an extra 2 months delay near the end of development? Had they set the new release date 2 months early in hopes they could finish quicker than expected and then had to push it back? Or when Nagoshi said they succeeded, did he just mean that they had successfully finished the game, not that it was successfully completed in 6 months? It's hard to say, and all of it leaves a question mark over the exact time frame that Nagoshi took over on Shenmue, with around a 3-month margin of error from April to June 1999. Does it matter? No, not really. I just like having a concrete timeline where I can. So with Nagoshi leading the charge, Shenmue Chapter 1 Yokosuka would go on to release on December 29th, 1999 in Japan, with the promise of an international release later down the line. Upon release in Japan, the critics were pretty positive, with Famitsu giving the game 33 out of 40. I couldn't find anything about the Japanese sales figures though, but as it was seen as the Dreamcast killer app, it probably sold decently enough against the Dreamcast Japanese install base. Although the game's massive budget meant that it could never realistically make its money back, even with the eventual worldwide release. The international gaming press were already hyped for Shenmue. IGN even made an article around the game's Japanese release, providing now lost video showcasing lots of aspects of the game, even stating at the end, "You'll notice that we have a whole bunch of shots showing Ryo's mug. That's because it's still hard for us to believe that such a detailed face could be rendered in the middle of a fully defined world." Despite the first Shenmue taking place entirely in Japan, the international release wasn't going to retain the Japanese voice acting. Instead, all the dialogue would be redone by English voice actors. Obviously, the recording of these new lines would take place in a predominantly English-speaking country, right? Like America or maybe Canada? Yeah, no. Likely at Yu Suzuki's request, maybe so he could keep a close eye on things, all the new English lines would be recorded in Japan. Okay, so they just have to spend a bit of extra money flying voice actors into the country to record lines and paying for their hotel stays. Yeah, no, that's a lot of extra money, so we'll just grab every single native English speaker in Japan who has ever done any amount of voice work and put them in the game and make them do around 3 characters each. Keep in mind, a lot of these actors had mostly only ever done commercials, and were not voice actors because they were good at acting or had good voices, but just because they were native English speakers who lived in Japan. Whenever a Japanese commercial or any other project needed a native English speaker to say a couple things in English, these were the people they'd hire. Most of these actors had only ever provided their natural speaking voices for any project, and since most of them were asked to provide voices for multiple characters, they would also be asked to provide character voices to distinguish their voice across their multiple roles, often to hilarious effect.
Sorry, I'm in a big hurry.
Cyril, my friend.
I too am human.
Another thing to consider is that the voice director along with the other staff in the studio didn't speak much English, so it would have been hard for them to tell if a line was said correctly or if the takes they had were actually any good.
They sure look good. Don't talk to me. I almost lost it.
Take for example one line I noticed in the game, when Ryo is at the slot house and considers playing on the 20 token bet slot machine. The line is, "Enough playing, time for a 20 token bet." Basically he's saying, enough fooling around, time to go all out on a 20 token machine. But this is how Corey says the line.
Enough playing time for a 20 token bet.
Yeah, that's not right. Either he didn't notice the comma or the comma was missing on his script, and because Corey was probably the only fluent English speaker in the room, no one else caught it. There aren't many lines that are said incorrectly though, but there are many lines that are said in a weird way, often with the actor putting emphasis on the wrong words. This is something a good voice director could have easily pointed out, among other things, to get much better performances out of these actors. A good voice director can really add a lot to the quality of a project's voice acting, and Shenmue didn't have a good one, at least not one good at directing English-speaking actors. I said before that all the English actors lived in Japan, but one actor would be flown into Japan from America to record their lines. His name is Corey Marshall, and he provided the voice for the main character, Ryo Hazuki. I should also mention before we continue that in an interview with Corey Marshall conducted by the Shenmue Dojo in 2008, Corey said this. The script that I was given was as thick as a book, and I'd also meet every English-speaking person in Japan due to the fact that the game was so massive that we needed as many people as possible. We even pulled from the US military base nearby. Yeah, so some of the voices you hear in the English version of Shenmue aren't even voice actors at all, and could be people from the US military. Anyway, back to Corey Marshall. Here's an excerpt from an interview with Corey conducted by Titan Game Studios. There was an audition for Shenmue in New York City where I lived at the time. The notice stated that it would be for a video game and that I would need to record in Japan. So I did hope that it would be a big project, similar to the games that I know and love to play myself. I was not told any details at that point. It was not until later that they told me the name of the project. When they told me I would be recording for Sega, I was definitely excited about that. Then I knew it was probably going to be something epic. Corey would get the role, partly because of his martial arts experience. Seriously. I knew I had heard that from somewhere, but I couldn't find a source, so I messaged Corey on Twitter and he got back to me and confirmed it. Thanks again for responding, Corey, if you're watching this. Anyway, after he got the role, he was flown out to Japan to record lines. For 4 months. There's a lot of dialogue in Shenmue, and no one has more lines than the main character. Though despite the massive task, Corey seems to remember his time voicing it over very fondly, and is much loved by the Shenmue community. After all the voices were recorded and the game went through another round of bug fixing, Shenmue would launch in North America on November 6, 2000, and in Europe on November 24, 2000. It received positive reviews across the board, and I think Eurogamer's Rob Fahey put it best in his review. Like the real life it tries so hard to emulate, you only get from Shenmue whatever it is that you put into it. If you stick rigidly to the plot and try to get to the end of the game in a hurry, you will be shockingly disappointed by the game. But if you take the time to explore and allow yourself to be sidetracked by the wonders of the world of Shenmue, you'll experience one of the most compelling and unusual gaming experiences ever created. While this is certainly not the last word in gaming which some enthusiasts had hoped for, it may well be the first word in a whole new page in video gaming history. 9 out of 10. Well, that was his review, now it's time for mine. That's right, we've finally reached the point in the video where I do my own review of the game, unless you count my playthrough of the demo as a review. For the record, the footage you'll be seeing throughout my review is the 2018 HD re-release of Shenmue on PC. This is mostly for the widescreen support. I'm also running 2 mods, one that makes the cutscenes widescreen as well, and one that fixes the port's dialogue audio quality issues. Keep in mind, because the cutscenes are now widescreen, there will occasionally be things on the side of the screen you're not supposed to see, but I'll try not to show that where I can. I think that trade-off is worth having the whole game in widescreen. I've also turned the bloom effect off to get the footage a bit closer to what the Dreamcast original looked like, although normally I'd leave it on because it's a decent effect. We'll talk more about the HD re-release much later in this video. The game starts on November 29th, 1986, which is also Ryo's birthday. Although he's not gonna like his birthday present, it's a dead dad.
Get up. I'll allow you to die like a warrior.
Yeah, it turns out some guy called Lan Di killed your martial arts dad and took something called the Dragon Mirror, and now you play as Ryo Revenge Quest Hazuki as you embark on an epic journey to uncover the mystery of the Dragon Mirror and avenge your father's death by finding and taking on Lan Di. But first, gotta buy some capsule toys. These Sonic models are from Sonic the Fighters. Remember that from the beginning of the video? Okay, but now it's time to get serious and look through every drawer in my home. Cassette tape, flashlight, batteries, picture, another picture, a Sega Saturn. Let's turn off this light. Let's turn on this light. Mind as clear as a polished mirror. Oh look, my favorite nail. Orange. Orange. Memory about my dead dad telling me to eat my vegetables.
Ryo, while you're still sleeping in bed, farmers are working hard in the fields, carefully picking carrots one by one. So how can you waste them like that?
Oh my god, it's a pan! In Shenmue, the amount of interactivity is insane, and it has its roots in old text-based adventure games. In those, it was somewhat common to open lots of drawers and pick up items and read descriptions of the random things inside those drawers. Shenmue does all that, but in a completely visual way, and with a level of detail only Yu Suzuki would have the balls to provide. Pick up some move scrolls and read them to learn new moves. The last message my father wrote before his death. Piggy! Look, this clock is accurate to the in-game time. Look, this calendar is accurate to the in-game day. Alright, enough looking around, let's actually get into the core gameplay. Talking to people. This game's all about going around and talking to people to figure out what to do next, and that's more fun than it sounds, trust me. Now remember the What's Shenmue demo? where if you were to follow a walkthrough you would skip a ton of gameplay and have a very bad opinion of the game? Well, imagine the full game is just a long series of tiny Shenmue demos, and now you understand why following a walkthrough is just the wrong way to play the game. The core gameplay is figuring out what to do, and it's not hard at all. Oftentimes multiple people can give you the clue you need to continue, and many more people will point you in the direction of those people. There will even often be different ways to progress through the game, some more obscure than others. You're never searching for a needle in a haystack, and despite what it may feel like, talking to people is not something getting in the way of the actual gameplay. Talking to people is the actual gameplay. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it. There's also the fortune teller who for 300 yen will give you a hint on how to progress, a great non-immersion breaking way to get a hint if you do somehow get stuck. But let's say you decide you want to get through all the talking as quickly as possible, so you use a walkthrough. Well, instead of going around and exploring and talking to people, now you're waiting for the clock. Shenmue infamously has times where you know you need to be somewhere at a certain time, and there's no way to speed up the clock. So now that you've skipped investigating and figuring things out for yourself, you just end up needing to wait even longer for the next story event, so of course you're going to hate the game. I don't have a problem with anyone who genuinely played Shenmue without a walkthrough and decided they didn't like the game. That's fair. Shenmue is certainly not a game for everyone, but there are a lot of people out there who have this idea that Shenmue is all about the combat, or at least not about investigating on your own, so they use a walkthrough to get through the game faster, and then complain that the game has too much waiting and no interesting gameplay. One last thing to note is that Shenmue is all about exploring the world and getting stuck into the details. Using a walkthrough can rob you of that as well. But when you are waiting, there are things to do. There's Space Harrier and Hang On at the arcade, along with Darts, QTE Title, and Excite QTE. Get a high enough score and you win capsule toys. Side note, while I was recording footage for this video, I made it to the night stage in Hang On, and earned the capsule toy both for the first time in my life, so that's neat. Back to activities, there's also the slot house, feeding the kitty, petting the kitty, store raffles, capsule toy machines, training your moves, calling people on the phone, listening to songs on your cassette player or from one of the game's many jukeboxes, and also talking to people for fun and not for progression. There's also exploration. It's a very detailed world after all, and Yu Suzuki wasn't afraid to put things in the game that most players won't see or that serve little to no purpose. For example, there's the Mahjong Parlor. It has its own unique interior music and has a guy running it who I swear only has one line and is never helpful to you. This place has a lot of unique assets and you could play through the whole game and never come in here. To this day, despite my almost embarrassing amount of hours spent playing this game, I'll still find new details I've never seen before on new playthroughs. Even while recording footage for this video, I came across a cutscene I'd never seen or heard of before. Literally every time I play Shenmue I find something new, it's crazy. But wait, this game was originally Virtua Fighter RPG. Where's the fighting? Well, remember back to the demo again, where fighting wasn't shown off at all? Well, I'd say it's because fighting isn't the biggest aspect of Shenmue, hence why I'm just now getting to it. First of all, there's a lot I like about the fighting system. The fighting mechanics themselves feel very much like Virtua Fighter. Even a lot of the moves are similar. There's a depth to the mechanics inherent from using Virtua Fighter as a base. The game doesn't require you to be familiar with Virtua Fighter, nor does it require you to get good. If you lose a fight, you often start over again and the opponents get easier every time you lose, so you can almost ignore the fighting entirely and still make it through the game just fine with a little patience. There's more surrounding the fighting though. There's an RPG-like system of leveling up your moves, either from performing them over and over when training, or using them often when in combat, although you won't be in combat that often, so if you want to really level up a move, then you should practice in your downtime. You will also level up your moves slightly every time you go to bed, and can choose which moves to focus on while you sleep. Leveling up a move doesn't simply make it deal more damage. Often when you level a move up to a certain point, Yo will perform the move with a new animation, performing the move faster or even gaining the ability to continue the move into an extra hit. It actually makes it feel like you're getting better at performing these moves outside of dealing slightly more damage. There's also learning new moves. You can find and purchase move scrolls as well as encounter sometimes missable events where characters will teach you moves. There are also some moves that you learn just by performing their button combination when training. And if there's a certain move you want to perform but it has a difficult button combination, you can set one move to be performed with a single button. It's all great stuff and you'll feel right at home if you're a Virtua Fighter fan, but I do have some gripes. Virtua Fighter is a one-on-one fighting game, yet Shenmue features fights against multiple opponents at once, and not much has been changed to the fighting mechanics to accommodate this change in scenario. Trying to lock onto a certain enemy is pretty finicky, and due to the lack of invincibility frames, if you get completely surrounded you can find yourself in a tough spot. There are moves that can hit multiple enemies at once, but they aren't common nor would a first time player likely make use of them. Instead, it's best to use throw moves. since you're invincible while you perform them, and you can grab an enemy decently quickly before another enemy has a chance to hit you. Overall, the game's combat can feel frustrating to new players during moments like these, and even for returning players, I don't think the group fights are a highlight of the combat. But again, it can all be ignored. The game is very forgiving, so you can easily play the entire game without learning any extra moves or doing any training, and you'll be just fine. There also just isn't much combat in the game in general. You can spar with Fukusan in the dojo during a certain time frame in the story, but you can only spar once a day and it isn't a proper fight. And there are no repeatable fights. Outside of an extra game mode you unlock after beating the game, the only fights you can get into are during certain story events, although repeatable fights would appear in Shenmue 2, but we'll get to that. Another gripe I have, at least with the original Dreamcast release, is all the loading. Loading screens are frequent and decently long, usually around 20 seconds. I understand there was basically no way around this at the time, given how the Dreamcast GD-ROMs were basically CD-ROMs and the Dreamcast memory wasn't large enough to have more of the world loaded at once. But it still impacts gameplay and makes exploration more of a chore. Luckily, this issue can be largely avoided when playing Shenmue today, either by playing the 2018 remaster with its near-instant load screens, or even emulating the original and fast-forwarding through the loads. And that's basically the game. Talk to people, get immersed in the world, play some hang-on, get into a fight occasionally. I swear it's way better than it sounds. Although things do change at a certain point in the story, when you end up getting a job at the harbour driving a forklift. You do a daily forklift race and then move boxes, then it's your lunch break, and then you move some boxes, and then you clock off for the day. It's actual Job Simulator 1999, and it's way better than it sounds. Or maybe it isn't, I don't know. But no other game would do this, and that's why I love it. Shenmue is a unique game, and it's better for it. And just when you think, after many hours of play, that the game has shown you everything it has up its sleeve, bam! You're driving a motorcycle at top speeds through a city at night on your way to save your kidnapped maybe girlfriend from a gang. A real payoff to working a forklift job for at least 5 in-game days, and the fact that it plays a lot like Hang-On is the cherry on top. The fights do become a bit more common later into the game, culminating in the 70-man battle, where you fight 70 men, go figure. This is a sequence you can repeat from the main menu after you beat the game, and is by far the most in-depth combat encounter. All 70 men also have names and backstories, despite most of them only appearing in this fight and having no dialogue. God, I love it. But wait, how do you find out about all the NPC backstories? I think it's time to talk about the Shenmue Passport disc. What's that, you ask? Well, it's essentially the online portion of the game. Yep, in 1999, the Passport service shut down on April 1st, 2002, but there are still things you can do. Hey, that rhymed. First, let's take a look at what's available without an internet connection. You have the information section, which contains the same tutorials we saw in the What's Shenmue demo, although now they are in English in the international release, and there are 3 more tutorials than we saw in the demo. Still looks really impressive. Then we can listen to some Shenmue music, although I don't think this has every song, it's still a cool feature. Then we have the theater, where you can watch every cutscene you've unlocked from the main game, along with some promotional FMVs. This is a good way to see if you've watched every cutscene in your playthrough or not, since there are some missable ones. And that's it. Access to the rest of the disc is blocked off by a requirement to connect to the internet. You can hook your Dreamcast up to a dial-up connection to continue, but that's getting less and less feasible with every passing year. You could also use a Dream Pi, which makes connecting your Dreamcast to the internet much easier. Luckily, in 2017 it was discovered that just by changing a few bytes on the disc, you can make the game ignore the internet check and continue to the proper passport section. You might think that it's pointless to skip it since all the content would still be missing without the ability to retrieve it from the servers, but there's a surprising amount here that still works fine without the server being online. First up, Shenmue World. Here you can look at all the moves you've learned and how much you've mastered them. Look at maps of Yokosuka and the harbour along with some pictures. There's supposed to be text over these images telling you more about them, that's now missing. And you have the character profiles. This is where you would have learned all about the NPCs in the game. Basic info is stored on the disc, but the actual backstories themselves are now missing. Luckily they were printed in physical media like the Shenmue guidebook, so they are still available to read today by looking online. Next we have Urgent Messages, which is of course no longer functional, but beyond that it will also soft lock your game and force you to restart your console, so stay away. Next is Nozomi's Messages, which while also non-functional will not soft lock your game, which is a plus. Next up is Network Ranking, which was an online leaderboard. It obviously doesn't work now, but at least it has a unique song that is straight fire. Anyway, Shenmue.com, it plays 1 second of a song then boots me out, cool. Online manual also doesn't work, but at least you can see the options. Then we come to one of the more functional menu options, Everyone's Space. Here you can see what day it is on your save file, stats for the kitten including the name you gave it, and accurate in-game weather reports scrolling by, which is really neat. There's Shenmue goodies where you can trade winning cans from the vending machines from your save file and have cute little characters on your VMU. Some of these characters wouldn't appear until Shenmue 2, and one of them until Shenmue 3. There's Free Market where you can trade in capsule toys you earned from getting the jackpot on the slot machines in exchange for animal capsule toys. And What's New, which no longer works. Now we just have one more thing left to try out, Data Review, which in my opinion is one of the coolest things on the Passport and still completely works. Here you can see stats about your save file, and I mean a lot of stats. Just look at all of this. And some of the stuff it keeps track of is insane. Number of conversations, number of searches, number of times walls hit, average QC reaction time, how many times you've played each individual slot machine, for how long and how many tokens. How many times you've used each different payphone, how many capsule toys purchased, how many crates you've moved with the forklift, how many drinks you've bought and how many of each can, how many of each item you've purchased and from which stores. It's a lot, and I didn't even name everything. I mean, look at it go. Another cool thing is that it's possible to turn your save file from the PC remaster of Shenmue into VMU data and view your stats on the Passport. Just make sure it's the PAL version of the Passport disc. And that's it. Pretty cool early internet integration into a console game. I should also mention there's an awesome app for your phone called Sukapass, which aims to recreate the Shenmue Passport experience, restoring things like the character bios and Nozomi's messages, so go check it out if you're interested. And also while I was making this video, some fans managed to get the Passport back up and running again. If you use a DreamPi to connect your Dreamcast to the internet, it will just work automatically. It's not 100% back, the online leaderboard still doesn't work, and Shenmue Goodies is missing some content, but other than that, it's back. Really cool stuff. Okay, how about we wrap up this review? As Ryo sets sail for China and the game draws to a close, what do I think about the first Shenmue? It's an experience, and a unique one. It's not a game for everyone, but give it a chance and you might be surprised. I don't think I've ever played any other game quite like it, which is why I keep coming back. And no, despite what many say, Yakuza is nothing like Shenmue. They are completely different games, but I do love the Yakuza games as well. I give the first Shenmue an 8.5 out of 10. Now it's time for Beta Breakdown, the section where I talk about content cut from the game. This will be far from everything, just the most important stuff. Originally, Ryo was going to be able to ride a bike. They even showed it off before release, as you can see here. It was likely removed because navigating the world on foot was already decently fast, with the bike only being a tiny bit faster. I also imagine the tightly packed nature of the map along with making it harder to talk to people probably contributed as well. The animations of Ryo riding the bike are still in the game files. Lead programmer Tak Kirai said this in a Retro Gamer interview. Actually, I was the first guy who implemented the bike riding feature. This was done at the early stage of development. We originally intended to begin the game in China, so I made it as a showcase to see how it looked when you rode the bike in a meadow. Another programmer took over that part of the project and worked on the vehicle programming at the end of Shenmue. There's also a debug build of Shenmue floating around, dated after the Japanese release but before the North American launch. It's NTSC and has English audio. The debug menu allows you to jump to any point in the story, jump to any map including test maps, and play any cutscene from the game including some unused ones. It's just fun to play around with too. And that concludes Beta Breakdown. It's time to get back to our timeline. After the release of Shenmue 1, the sequel was already well underway. After all of it was supposed to be part of the first game anyway. Despite the sequel being even larger in scope than the first game, it wouldn't take as long to develop as the first. Yu Suzuki was now back leading the project, perhaps more eager to prove that he could release the game under his own leadership. He certainly wouldn't want someone else to have to bail him out again. There's no information on the budget of Shenmue 2, only that it was a more modest sum. My guess would be that the number of employees working on the project was scaled back a bit, along with the shorter development time due to a majority of the game being completed before the release of the first game. And that's really all there is to say. Yu Suzuki and his team quietly worked on bringing the rest of the Shenmue experience to the people, and on September 6, 2001, Shenmue 2 would be released for the Dreamcast in Japan. Then, a little over 2 months later, the game would release in Europe on November 23, 2001. This despite the previous international release for the first Shenmue taking 11 months to release after the Japanese launch. Well, there's a reason it was so quick this time. The game still featured Japanese audio, but with English subtitles. Sega decided that the cost of redoing all the voice acting in English wasn't worth it, and despite the game's European release, Shenmue 2 would never release in North America for the Dreamcast, and there's a reason for that. On the 31st of January 2001, just under 3 months after Shenmue 1's North American release, Sega announced they would be leaving the console business. They would continue as a game developer and publisher, releasing games on other systems, but would no longer manufacture their own hardware. Along with Sega stating that starting in 2002, they would not promise any more games releasing for the Dreamcast. It was a sad day for Sega fans and Dreamcast owners, but the Dreamcast had underperformed and failed to save the company's financial hardships. It made sense for Sega to instead focus on releasing games with their still popular IPs on other companies' more popular hardware. Then at the Tokyo Game Show a couple months later on March 30th, 2001, Sega announced a long-term strategic alliance with Microsoft, stating that 11 Sega games would premiere on Microsoft's upcoming console, the Xbox. At the time, only 4 of the 11 games were announced, that being Jet Set Radio Future, Sega GT, Gun Valkyrie, and an unnamed sequel to Panzer Dragoon which would become Panzer Dragoon Auto. You can probably see where this is going. Shenmue 2 would be releasing for the Xbox. I couldn't find anything definitive about whether or not Shenmue 2 was one of the 11 games mentioned in the partnership, but Microsoft did get exclusive rights to Shenmue 2 in North America. Microsoft gave Sega some extra money to port the game to their system, which led to the game receiving an English dub after all, and that dub was handled pretty much exactly the same as the first game, and you can tell.
Excuse me.
Welcome. Huh? Don't think I've seen you before.
You haven't.
This is the Dim Sum building. You're probably looking for the T-Brick building, aren't you?
No, not particularly.
Don't talk, just leave.
Okay.
Shenmue 2 would release for the Xbox in North America on October 28, 2002, which is just under a year and 2 months after the Japanese release for the Dreamcast. Shenmue 2 would also release in Europe for the Xbox on March 21, 2003, with the Xbox version never releasing in Japan. The main differences between the Xbox and Dreamcast versions, besides the English audio, includes the new ability to take photos along with some in-game filters to play with. There's some extra content to unlock like lore comics for taking photos of certain people. The Xbox version comes on one disc instead of the multiple for the Dreamcast. It runs at a far more consistent frame rate, has faster load times, although they are still somewhat lengthy, and has some extra graphical effects. There's a lot of small texture differences and the like as well. There's a great site called shen2diffs.co.uk that's all about compiling these differences. A lot of work has gone into that, so I figured I had to shout it out. Since Shenmue 1 wasn't available for the Xbox, a bonus DVD was included with every copy of the game, called Shenmue the Movie, to get new players up to speed with the game's story. It was an actual movie, using footage of the Dreamcast game and using uncompressed audio of the dialogue. The movie was directed by Yu Suzuki himself, and although it was made primarily for the Xbox version of Shenmue 2, it would also receive a Japanese version and be released there separately on both DVD and VHS, like it was a real movie. Also like it was a real movie, it was actually shown in select theaters in Japan. Yeah, you could go into a movie theater, buy some popcorn and sit down and watch an hour and a half of Dreamcast cutscenes on the big screen. I would have loved that. Boys with the Time Machine, 1 ticket for Shenmue the Movie, please. And with that, it's time to get into my review of Shenmue 2. Once again, I'm playing the 2018 remaster on PC with the same widescreen cutscenes and audio issue fixing mods. The remaster is based on the Xbox version, so keep that in mind. So first off, as long as you're playing either the Dreamcast or remastered versions and not the Xbox version, you have the option to start a new game using completed save data from Shenmue 1. To really make it feel like one long continuous playthrough, as if both these games were meant to be a single game or something. Pretty much everything will carry over from your Shenmue 1 save, your entire inventory including story items, capsule toys, money, Sega tokens, moves and move scrolls. Oddly, the only thing missing really is your cassette player and all your cassette tapes, as they don't appear in Shenmue 2 at all. Kinda sucks, but not a huge loss. There's also a new Game Plus option if you have a completed Shenmue 2 save, but calling it that is a bit misleading. It's basically just a you can now skip cutscenes mode. You gain the ability to skip cutscenes, but no other aspects of your save file are carried over. The remaster made it so you always have the ability to skip cutscenes even on your first playthrough, and thus the new Game Plus option was removed in that version because it was made redundant. Here's the 411 though, you're gonna have your money stolen, like really quickly. Walk past this point and you lose your money forever, and this is pretty much the start of the game. But you do keep everything else, including things you bought with your money while you still had it, and since Shenmue 2 now features pawn shops where you can sell items for money, you know where this is going. Time to buy lighters like Duo is a chain smoker. Better buy a couple hundred, don't buy the knockoff ones though. Maybe I'll buy some capsule toys from this machine, or buy some random loot boxes of toys from child labor over here. Shenmue 2 feels a bit more like what open world games would become in the years afterwards. There's much more side content and the world itself is a lot larger than the first game. There's also a real money system this time around. Instead of just earning 500 yen a day from Ine-san, or making lots of extra money while locked into a mandatory forklifting job where you don't have a lot of free time to spend it, here you can earn money by doing some jobs whenever you feel like, or gambling for money in all sorts of ways. If we're talking side content in Shenmue 2, we're going to have to talk about the most important, most impactful, most fun and fleshed out side content in any open world game. Lucky Hit. Look at that ball go. Oh, I missed. Maybe if I place it here, there we go. Sweet, I won. That's Lucky Hit, and it's everywhere. You will be tripping over Lucky Hit boards left, right, and center in Shenmue 2, and they come in all sorts of flavors. First up, there's the capsule toy Lucky Hit boards called Gotcha. In these, you get the toy depicted on the pocket when you land in it. Pretty simple and a fun way to boost your capsule toy collection. The rest, though, are all about earning that dosh, and the rules can vary wildly between different stands. If you count Gotcha, there are 16 different variations of Lucky Hit, and I don't want to list them all, but here's some of them and you'll get the idea. Circle 1, drop 3 balls, any one of them lands in a circle, you win. Perfect 3, drop 3 balls, if all 3 of them land in a circle, you win. Take 2, drop 3 balls, if at least 2 of them land in a circle, you win. One shot, drop 1 ball, if it lands in a circle, you win, otherwise you lose. Skull Pocket Circle 1, same as Circle 1, but if you land a ball in the Skull Pocket, then you immediately lose. And many more. There are 33 Lucky Hit stands and 103 individual Lucky Hit boards in Shenmue 2, with each board not only having different rules but also different bet amounts and payout multipliers, with different pockets and peg layouts. No Lucky Hit board is the same. If you like Lucky Hit, then you'll like Shenmue 2, there's enough of it to almost consider it the main attraction. Some stands will also have a part-time job flag in front of them, which means you can work at the stand for a little bit, playing against the customers to earn money. It's not a good way to earn money, but it is fun. Want another job? How about moving crates with Dylan? He's a great guy, even if he doesn't believe in straight lines.
Left, 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 left! Right, right! Yeah! Right, right, right! Left, left, left! Left, 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 left!
Or later on in the game you can move crates with Kongo. Kongo doesn't believe in straight lines either, or referring to himself in the first person.
Kongo can't talk now! She'll get mad!
Huh?
Kongo works here! Do you want to work too?
Those are the only 2 jobs in Shenmue 2, crate lifting and running a Lucky Hit stand, but there are many ways to earn money outside of jobs. We already talked about playing Lucky Hit, so let's talk more about those pawn shops. Pawn shops are what collecting all those capsule toys in Shenmue 1 was for. If you have a full set of something, then it will go for more money, and each pawn shop has different prices for different things, so if you want the most bang for your buck, then you need to shop around. By far the best way to make money though is with gambling. Thanks to Ryo's secret superpower known as the save and load, gambling is easily the best way to make money fast. Roll it on top, big or small, Flowerbird, Wind and Moon, arm wrestling, bet against people at darts, earn money at street fights. And then there's the arcade games with Hang On and Space Harrier along with 2 new machines, Outrun and Afterburner. Darts, Neo Darts, QTE Title and XIQTE all return. Play the slots for fun, not for gambling, just like the slots in Shenmue 1.
Do you know a place where I can gamble nearby?
Just outside this building, they play Lucky Hit.
I can't do it here?
This is family-friendly entertainment.
I see.
You can also play all the minigames and street fights in the Shenmue collection on the main menu, so if you just want to play some Hang On without all the father revenge stuff, then you can.
I apologize, but I don't know. Would you mind asking someone less educated, please?
Thank you. Excuse me now.
The size of the world is insane for the era, so much to explore, so many unique interiors with unique characters and unique music. Why does this small insignificant bar have the best music in the game? Because of the insane scale, the intricate details of the first game have been scaled back a tiny bit. The level of detail is still much higher than pretty much any other open world game, but now some NPCs don't have a schedule. Pretty much any NPC you see walking around is one that's programmed to appear randomly, and since they have no place to be, if you ask them for directions they'll often say, "Oh, I was just heading there, follow me," and then they do a complete 180 and you can follow them. That's still way more interaction than you'd expect for roaming NPCs in an open world game, but not to the same level as the first game where all NPCs not only had a schedule, but a home or apartment that they'd always return to. The gameplay progression is largely the same as the first game. Talking to people is either the solution or will lead you to the solution. You also have more options when talking to people, as now you can ask anyone where the nearest part-time job is, the nearest place to gamble, and the nearest pawn shop. Now you're in a strange new place that Ryo isn't familiar with, so you better buy a map. And another one. And another one. Buying a map unlocks a mini-map in the corner of the screen for that location. You can also look at it more up close. There is one big change to the gameplay. You no longer have to wait. When Ryo gets somewhere and says he needs to wait until a certain time, now you have the option to choose wait, and Ryo will stand there very patiently as time fast forwards. A very welcome feature. Despite there being so much more to do in Shenmue 2, there are some omissions from the first game. Firstly, using the telephone is no longer an option, so you won't be making any phone calls in Shenmue 2. Next, there's no longer any store raffles, though you do get a random capsule toy for buying useless junk food for some reason. There's no forklifting, all crate moving is done by hand, like real men. But most importantly, there's no training. Yeah, despite many characters reminding Ryo that he needs to diligently train to hone his martial arts, there's no option to train. There's this guy at the park you can occasionally spar with when you ask him a question, which is kinda training, but that's it. The only way to level up your moves is to use them in real fights, which is an option now thanks to Street Fights, although you don't come across any Street Fights in the game's first location except right before you leave. Street Fights are endlessly repeatable and get a little harder every time you win, and a little easier every time you lose, provided you're not at level 1, although there is a limit where the opponent stops leveling up. These fights are all one-on-one and are all unique with how the opponent fights or even the win condition. One fight you might need to dodge all attacks, another you might just need to hit your opponent once, another your opponent won't fight back and the goal is to bring their health down to 0 in a limited number of moves. It's all good fun and a somewhat decent way to make money on top of leveling up your moves at the same time. I think perhaps they figured people would just do street fights to level up their moves rather than fight the air like in Shenmue 1, so they just didn't bother to add training. I still think the option would be nice, especially in the early game where street fights aren't available. As for the fighting mechanics themselves, they are basically the same as the first game. There are still missable moves you can learn from characters and you can still buy move scrolls to learn more moves. There are only 3 real differences. The first is that enemies have visible health bars now, which is neat. The second is that, I guess they were running out of button combinations, so now you have to switch out which moves you perform when you perform a certain button combination. The third is you can no longer make it so you can perform a certain move with a single button, which kinda sucks.
Hazuki-san, right? If you ever run into trouble, come talk to me.
There's also duck racing. Yes, duck racing. It's kind of well hidden, so you won't find it unless you already know about it. You need to make sure you talk to 2 people, the girl running the counter at the Tomato convenience store and the girl near the fountain in Pigeon Park. If she isn't there, then you're probably still on disc 1 and need to wait until you spend a night at Shuing's apartment so you're on disc 2. Even with the Xbox and remastered versions, the game still does a virtual disc swap, so you still need to keep these things in mind. After you've met the 2, go to this secret empty lot and pick up the bronze medal. You might as well grab the capsule toy boxes too. Then go to the top floor of the arcade and win the 2 fights. You'll get the silver medal. Then you can go to the girl at the Tomato convenience store and go bet on some duck races. Each race, the ducks will have different random stats, from a consistent set of possible stats, and different payouts depending on how likely they are to win. But what if you want to actually play as a duck? Well, you have to go to the tree behind Manmo Temple, catch at least 2 leaves at once, twice in a row, then catch the duck feather that falls. You'll find a duck in the tree and can grab it. You'll now have a duck in your inventory for the rest of the game. Now when you go to the duck races, you will have the option to race your own duck that you control. You won't win at first, but with every race your duck will slowly level up and become better, with more stamina and speed and such. You have to pay $50 for every race, and if you win, you earn a pointless gold medal and that's it. So much development time went into duck racing and all the steps to unlock it, and most people probably missed it entirely. That's Shenmue for you. Just like the Feng Mei birthday event. What's that, you ask? Look it up if you want. I'm not going to go into it and I couldn't be bothered to get footage of it. Also, someone made a version of duck racing that you can play on Twitch at twitch.tv/duckracing, so you don't even need to own the game to bet on some ducks. Go check it out.
Why don't you ask at an antique shop? I have the feeling I've seen this somewhere before.
An antique shop?
The story is, well, you're on a quest to find Lan Di still, while making friends, some sexier than others, and exploring China on the way. I don't want to talk about the story very much because, honestly, it's not why I play Shenmue. The story is serviceable, nothing amazing, does its job of always giving you an objective and moving the game along. Some characters are cool, but it's really the gameplay, immersion, and world building that makes Shenmue special. There's never any big plot twists or emotional moments, at least not to any degree that makes the story stand out at all. I don't want to say that the story is bad, because it's not, just nothing special, hence why I forgot to talk about it in my review of Shenmue 1. I'd give the story of Shenmue 1 and 2 a 6 out of 10.
We'll have a competition to see who can get rare items first, you or me.
There are 3 locations in Shenmue 2, Hong Kong, Kowloon, and Guilin, in that order. Kowloon is interesting because a lot of it takes place inside dilapidated buildings with endless rooms and floors. and you can go into pretty much every room despite there being hundreds of rooms. This was accomplished with something called the Magic Room system. Basically, these rooms are randomly generated. There's a pool of objects that can spawn in the room, and they are distributed randomly. There's apparently even an algorithm that attempts to make each room feel believable, but I've seen things like one couch directly behind another identical couch, so it's not perfect. The randomness is determined by a set seed, meaning each room, despite being random, will always look the same on every playthrough. So if you tell your friend to go to a certain room on a certain floor because there's a gun on the table, your friend will see it there too. That amount of effort and detail is insane. Blue Moo on YouTube has videos exploring every magic room in the game. If you were to watch all the videos in one sitting, it would take you over 7.5 hours, so I hope you have most of the day free. And Phantom Riverstone also wrote some articles about it, go check them out if you like. Speaking of insane detail, Ryo will say the name of every store and sign in the game if you inspect them.
5 Stars Corporation, Kaiho Transport Company, Bar Zui Zui, Ming Ming Dim Sum, Ming Ming Dim Sum.
There's so many in the game, recording the lines must have been maddening. What else is there? Oh, there's the fortune tellers. There's 5 fortune tellers in Shenmue 2. 3 of them will give you different hints on how to progress, and 2 will give you your lucky number for the day for the slot machines. They all use a different technique to achieve their fortunes. There's also airing out books, which isn't really an activity since it's something you have to do at the start of every day during a certain section of the story, and it's basically just a lot of QTEs. It gives me forklift vibes from Shenmue 1, making the player do a mundane task for the sake of realism. It almost puts you in a state of zen as you zone out while you air out the books each day. Which is actually exactly why Ryo is doing it. Shuing makes you air out the books, and it's revealed that she did it to make Ryo regain his calm, since he's so crazy about avenging his father. If you hate airing out the books though, I totally get it. Jukeboxes return, and the songs can slap sometimes. Vending machines also return, but serve less of a function since Shenmue 2 doesn't have a passport disc, so instead if you get a winning can you just instantly receive a random Virtua Fighter capsule toy from this list here, and then Ryo buys another can, although it doesn't charge you again. Speaking of capsule toys, there are a lot more of them this time around, and some capsule toy machines are hidden in hard to find places. Really though? You're gonna risk your life for some capsule toys? Dude has a problem. As for my gripes, it's just a few carried over from Shenmue 1. The loading screens in the Dreamcast version really bring down the experience. They are faster in the Xbox version, but still a bit annoying, and in the remaster they are again pretty much non-existent. And the fighting is still a bit clunky when facing multiple opponents at once. Shenmue 2 is also one of the few games that makes you go, wow, I can't believe the game didn't just end. You have a final boss fight on top of a skyscraper, like it's the end of a Yakuza game or something, and then if you're on Dreamcast you have to put in the 4th disc. There's a whole nother disc after the final boss. It's the Guilin section of the game, which doesn't feature any side activities or fighting. It's all about the story and getting to know the character Shenhua. You know, the girl on the front cover of the first game that we are just now meeting at the end of the second game. You're mostly just walking through nature in this section. There is some gameplay like trying to find your way through the forest, QTE sections, gathering wood for a fire, but it's very linear. I didn't mind this part of the game the first time I played it, but there's very little reason to replay this section during a revisit unless it's been long enough that you've mostly forgotten it. It's also here where we finally learn what the name Shenmue actually means. It's the name of a fictional tree. Yep, it's a tree. What else did you expect from Yu Suzuki's magnum opus? And at the end of it all, some light beam shoots into a hovering sword that redirects into some firewood that shows the mirrors carved into a cave. Kind of odd that a game so focused on realism has supernatural elements right at the end of the second game. Didn't expect that for a game series that once made me work a forklift job for 5 days. So what do I think of Shenmue 2? Well, I think Shenmue 1 has the better first time experience, simply because it's a more unique game that really shoots for realism and detail at a level still never replicated again. Shenmue 2 is the game I revisit more often though, with its skippable cutscenes, more rewarding exploration, more side activities and more optional fights. Along with still having an amazing attention to detail for an open world game of this scale, it's way more replayable. Shenmue 2 is a more well-rounded game, and while I still really enjoy and respect the hell out of the first game, I think Shenmue 2 is my favourite of the series. I give Shenmue 2 a 9 out of 10. Now it's time for Beta Breakdown. So remember how the first Shenmue was supposed to let you ride a bike? Well, it comes as no surprise given what I've said about Shenmue 2's development that this feature was also planned for the China sections. Here are some screenshots of Ryo riding the bike in Hong Kong. This is also part of a removed side quest where you would have helped the pharmacy on your bike. The pharmacy was located down this completely empty part of the map that now serves no purpose, before it was moved to where it is in the final game. The little girl you see on Ryo's bike is also still in the final game, always seen at the pharmacy with her grandfather who owns it. Developer Morio Ashizuka said this about the cut event. The ability to ride a bike wasn't kept in Shenmue 2 in the end, was it? There was going to be an event where you put the girl at the pharmacy on your bike and run an errand. I don't remember it very well, but it was along the lines of the pharmacy owner having a bad leg, so Ryo goes for him by bicycle with the girl showing him the way. Ryo wasn't able to ride around freely though, it was a movie scene of him riding. Check out these screenshots of a village in Shenmue 2. This is either an early version of Bailu Village from Shenmue 3, or a cut village Ryo visited before Bailu. From what I can gather though, it's very much the latter. This village was apparently called Meow Village, and it was almost completely finished before being cut from the game, either the save needing to print another disc, or because it was seen as superfluous. This Shenmue Goodies 2 character image seems to depict this NPC from the village. There were a few cut lucky hit boards found in the game's data recently. Check out this giant one that might have been in the Ghost Hall building. While I was writing the script for this video, a debug build of Shenmue 2 was released online, and it's of the unreleased American Dreamcast version of the game. The build was compiled shortly after the game's Japanese release. It still has Japanese audio of course, and a bit of a rough and incomplete translation. It also contains the debug menu, very similar to the one found in the debug version of Shenmue 1. Equally fun to play around with, and an interesting piece of Shenmue history as it proves beyond a doubt that Sega were going to release Shenmue 2 on the Dreamcast in North America before Microsoft came into the picture. And again, while I was making this video, another Shenmue 2 build was released online. This time it's a Japanese build from around 5 months before launch. Apparently the build was compiled on November 6, 2000, but the last modified file on disk is from April 14, 2001, so it's hard to say exactly. This build also has a debug menu and an extra debug menu that you can enable with a mod, along with boatloads of small differences compared to the final game. Characters outside of cutscenes and activities have no dubbed voice and only have subtitles, the final cutscene isn't finished yet, and Duck Racing and Afterburner 2 are completely missing. There's also lots of unused dialogue from Meow Village in the files, allowing us to finally piece together a lot about what its purpose was. Ryo would go there searching for the Ulian Shu instead of finding it in the Manmo Temple library. It would be a small diversion talking to people in the village and eventually going to the Miao Guang Temple, obtaining it from the priest there. The beta also has a Yu Suzuki model in the files. They even made him a little chubby. Apparently the code suggests this model is linked to some kind of unknown event, pointing to a removed Easter egg of some kind. Even a Shenmue developer on Twitter had mentioned previously that Yu was in the game at one point as a hidden character. Shenmue often features developers as general NPCs, but Yu-san actually appeared in Shenmue 2 as a hidden character. I had a good laugh when I was shown it late at night, but the top development manager found it and put it on hold. If it had been released as it was, it would have caused a stir. By the way, it could be discovered if you searched a certain place on the way to Bailu Village. And that concludes this segment of Beta Breakdown. Let's hop back on our timeline. Actually, we have to go backwards on our timeline a little bit, to 2 months before Shenmue 2 launched in Japan for the Dreamcast, when an obscure Shenmue title was released for the Dreamcast only in Japan. It's called US Shenmue, and is basically identical to the original Shenmue 1, only it features English audio and the option of both English and Japanese subtitles, along with the feature to switch between them just by pressing the start button. It was called US Shenmue because it was the US version, but now for Japanese players to enjoy. It's an odd release, and it seems Sega were marketing this as a way to improve your English. My Japanese is very shaky, but I believe the back of the box says something along the lines of, "Students of English, let's learn." Let's just call this what it is, a lazy cash grab. Sega wanted to make a bit more money on Shenmue to recoup their losses a little, and this was a quick and easy way to make a bit of extra money. If they really cared about retooling Shenmue to be about learning another language, they could have developed some extra features. Like the option to have English and Japanese subtitles both on the screen at the same time, maybe a quiz mode where you're shown English words and have to select the proper meaning. US Shenmue doesn't feature anything that would require much additional development time. Having the option for 2 languages for subtitles and being able to use the start button to switch between them is the closest thing to a new feature this version offers. And to top it off, this is a horrible way to learn English. We already talked about some of the issues with the English dub of Shenmue, with actors putting emphasis on the wrong words or lines being mistranslated. And a lot of the dialogue in English just doesn't sound very natural. If you were learning English, you wouldn't want to pick up any bad habits from the English portrayed in Shenmue. So yeah, it's an interesting little piece of Shenmue history, an oddity for sure, but it's hard to respect it when it's an obvious cash grab made at almost no cost. Alright, now we can get back to our timeline proper. After the release of Shenmue 2, everyone was expecting Shenmue 3 to release sometime over the next few years, probably for the Xbox or maybe across all the then current systems. Some poor souls were even expecting Sega to release a Dreamcast 2 and for Shenmue 3 to release on that. Whatever they were smoking, I wish I had some. Yu Suzuki was confident Shenmue 3 would be released, and he was confident he would be able to wrap up the story eventually, with the plan being around 5 or 6 games total. But Sega had other ideas, and would no longer fund Shenmue the same way they had previously. If you know anything about Shenmue, you probably know that Shenmue 3 is nowhere nearby in our timeline right now, and if you're not a Shenmue superfan, or don't know how thorough I like to be, you might be expecting me to jump ahead a couple decades. But no, we have some games to talk about first before we get to Shenmue 3. On August 3rd, 2004, a game titled Shenmue Online was announced to be in development in a joint venture between Sega of Japan and JC Entertainment of Korea. It was a Shenmue MMORPG set to release sometime in 2005. Sega's sudden interest in launching an MMO may have been influenced by World of Warcraft, which was currently in closed beta and set to fully launch in a few months, but because of this collaboration being with a Korean company, it's more likely this was inspired by the booming MMO market in Korea, with games like Lineage and MapleStory. Sega also announced an agreement with T2 Technology Holdings to allow them to operate the game within China. I'd like to say thanks again to 24 Nathan on the Shenmue Dojo forums for providing me with lots of this information, such as an English press release for the announcement of Shenmue Online. JC Entertainment would be responsible for a large bulk of the development, with Yu Suzuki apparently overseeing everything. Yeah, we'll get to that. JC are most well known for their online basketball role-playing game, Freestyle. The game featured a lot of assets from Shenmue 2, although some of it was brand new. The soundtrack is also available online and features mostly remixes or new arrangements of existing Shenmue tracks. The game would see trouble almost right away. In 2005, JC Entertainment pulled out of the project due to a profit dispute, which caused a legal debate as to who owned the full rights to the game. Although Yu Suzuki would later state in an interview in November 2005 that Shenmue Online was a Sega venture and that they would fulfill their duty to complete it, and that development was progressing nicely. In July 2006 at the China Joy Convention, Shenmue Online was shown to the public with a CGI trailer and some gameplay. The game was now being developed by Interserve Taiwan. I have some statements made by someone named Zach who worked at Interserve during Shenmue Online's development. These were stated by him when he suddenly appeared on the Shenmue Dojo forums one day with this post in 2007. Keep in mind his English isn't the best. I worked on the Shenmue Online project in Shanghai at Interserve. The game had so many problems, from environment models to 3D motion capture cleanup to its minigames. It was a real-time fighting game forced onto an online game, so you can imagine how fun it would be with lag. With the mocap, it ended up with Interserve using interns to help with the editing and skinning. There was just so many characters that needed skinning and rigging, and then Sega decided to change the models, which resulted in all the characters needing to be reskinned with Max 5. Hahaha, Ruffle. 2 words that describe the failure of this game: poor pre-production. You know, garbage in, garbage out, or like my art instructor said back in art college, if you don't get the pre-production down right, you're just polishing a turd. Yu Suzuki's involvement. Don't know. Interserve for this project strictly was a work for hire, completely kept in the dark. Sega tell us to jump, we say, how high, boss client? When he was pressed for a more detailed response, this is what he said. Originally it was a Korean company that worked on the project, but disputes over profit eventually led to a bad breakup. It was then sourced to Interserve Taiwan, which meant that the Shanghai facility would end up working on the bulk of the project. I was the only American working at Interserve Shanghai at that time. I had the notion that Sega treated the Chinese outsourced workers at cheap labor and had no problem changing their designs and layouts for the game on the fly. Since labor costs were so cheap, Sega thought they could get away with it. Normally you would not be able to get away with such things if it was an American video game company, because any major changes would set back the project months, if not years, and cost an additional $2 to $4 million more, i.e. StarCraft Ghost. I worked on the motion capture and character skinning, binding the 3D model to Mech's character studio bones. The motion capture, fight scenes, was a bitch because the Taiwan quick check lady kept on denying and returning our edited motion capture, saying that it was inaccurate. The only reference the animators were given were video references of the motion capture actors. None of the animators ever played Shenmue on the old Dreamcast. Actually, none of the animators even liked fighting games. Nobody seemed to know what the Taiwan quick checker wanted, major communication problem, and Interserve was too cheap to fly her over to Shanghai and have a meeting with us. One of the art directors ended up helping us, and even the mocaps he personally passed ended up being rejected by Taiwan QC lady. I also talked with many of the environmental modelers, and they all said the project sucked ass. What's worse was a co-worker who worked on the minigames. He had to work overtime, midnight to even 2 in the morning, for a month. He looked like a zombie every time I saw him, and at the end the minigames were changed so his work was all for nothing. He was not one to lose his anger easily, but that time he almost lost it. Anyway, I left Interserve on good terms about a year ago. Last I heard from my co-workers is that Interserve is no longer working on Shenmue. Interserve had about over 200 employees when I left. There was also a huge talent drain at Interserve because the workers despised the new manager, who took all the powers away from the beloved art director, and so a majority of the artists decided to all leave at once. I don't know if Sega is going to finish Shenmue Online, but if it still decides to go on, do realize it will at first only be for the Asian markets. Regards, Zack. Zack's identity is confirmed to be legitimate because he provided genuine models and animation files from Shenmue Online, which you're seeing now. As you can tell, development of Shenmue Online didn't go smoothly with Interserve either. The project was basically doomed from the word go. The game may have had a closed beta in Korea, but once it was 2007, no one would hear about Shenmue Online ever again. The game was never officially cancelled, but since it's been 15 years since we've heard anything, I have my doubts it'll be finished. It's a very interesting piece of Shenmue history, but would it have been a good game? Probably not, but I'd like to give it a shot anyway. I've always liked MMOs that take place in settings other than generic fantasy, so playing an MMO that takes place in 1980s China sounds cool. I could have probably had some fun with it. But instead, Shenmue Online was just a footnote in Shenmue history. Let's get back to our timeline for a bit. After the release of Shenmue 2, Yu Suzuki would work on a few more games with Sega, Virtua Fighter 4 in 2001, Virtua Cop 3 and Outrun 2 in 2003, and Sega Race TV in 2008. After that last game, Yu Suzuki would go on to leave Sega to form his own studio, YSNet. I'll let you figure out what the YS stands for. This didn't look good for the future of the Shenmue series, but Yu Suzuki and Sega would continue to maintain a close relationship despite the split. This would be made apparent on November 1st, 2010, when Shenmue Gai, or Shenmue City, would be announced. It was a smartphone game with a planned PC version to come later which never released. Unlike Shenmue Online, this game would actually come out, but only in Japan and was only online for a year before closing. Despite the game using the Shenmue IP, it was developed and published entirely by YSNet, a good sign of Sega's willingness to let Yu Suzuki continue to use the Shenmue IP. Though it's unknown exactly what agreement they had come to, if for example YSNet paid a lump sum for the rights to make their own Shenmue game, or if Sega was to get a cut of the profits, it's a mystery. We do know that Sega did and still does own the rights to Shenmue, so they were only allowing YSNet to use the IP. YSNet didn't actually own it. Also, Sunsoft was in charge of operating the game. I assume that means server upkeep and maintenance. Shenmue City was described as a social game, in a similar vein to games like Mafia Wars. Yeah, it was 2010 alright. It also used a free-to-play model supported with microtransactions. You didn't control Ryo, instead you created your own character. The game's official site had this information on the game. Under the heading What is Shenmue City, 3 modes are explained: Search, Collection, and Bout. Players will search the neighborhoods of Yokosuka as they help Ryo, the main character of the first 2 games. As players clear events, the story will unfold. Collection refers to the capsule toy machines that have been a mainstay in the series. Over 100 types of items will be included in the game. Bout refers to a system wherein the player operates a martial arts dojo to support Ryo. Players can face off with one another in bouts that will allow both players to get stronger. The game was obviously made pretty cheap, mostly using assets from Shenmue 1 and some from Shenmue Online too. Might as well, I guess. Yu Suzuki stated that Shenmue City was maybe the gateway to continue the Shenmue story, either through updates to Shenmue City or with the game helping to fund development of other Shenmue projects. Shenmue City was planned to have an update to add Hong Kong, then possibly Kowloon, but only Yokosuka was ever available. After only being online for around a year, the game was shut down, with no international release or PC version. It was a failure and is now lost to time, and I'm not really surprised. It seemed like it could be a decent little time waster, but far from an experience I'm dying to play. Overall, I think Shenmue City was Yu Suzuki trying to release a Shenmue project with very little staff and budget, and this was the result. I'm sure he was hoping it would do well enough to fund future Shenmue projects, but this game never had the legs to achieve that. Now I bet you're thinking it's time I start talking about Shenmue 3, but I bet I can keep rambling. Ryo made an appearance in Sega's kart racer, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, on February 23, 2010, and then appeared again as a DLC character in the sequel on the 15th of January 2014, after winning an online poll. At GDC 2014, Yu Suzuki gave a presentation about the development of Shenmue, titling it a post-mortem, yikes. This presentation was a great help for piecing together Shenmue's early development. Go check it out if this monster of a video isn't enough for you. Alright, it's time to talk about E3 2015. Right before the expo, Yu Suzuki tweeted out a picture of a forklift, causing Shenmue fans around the world to go poggers. Sorry. Then during Sony's conference, they talked about Kickstarter for a little bit before dropping this bombshell.
This is a crazy
Yep, Shenmue 3 was going to be funded through Kickstarter. This was around 14 years after the launch of Shenmue 2. YesNet had struck a deal with Sony that, in exchange for Sony announcing the Kickstarter during their conference, along with Sony helping with development in some nebulous way, Shenmue 3 would be a console exclusive for PlayStation, alongside a PC version. The goal was $2 million, which it reached in only 9 hours, going on to eventually reach $6.3 million. There were lots of backer rewards, including spending $10,000 to be an NPC in the game, or spending $10,000 to have dinner with Yu Suzuki along with receiving a replica of Ryo's jacket. $4,000 to have your face on a lucky hit board in the game, that's awesome. There were capsule toy rewards, t-shirts, access to an early demo, just loads of stuff. The Kickstarter was one of the most successful gaming Kickstarters in the site's history. Although the money earned through Kickstarter would not be the only funding the game would receive, the Kickstarter's success acted as good leverage in publisher talks that YesNet didn't have before, leading to the game being picked up by a publisher in 2017, Deep Silver. Deep Silver provided extra funding for the game. In an interview with IGN Japan, Yu Suzuki stated the final budget for the game was around $20 million. Although the budget was a lot smaller this time around, there are some other factors to consider, like how a lot of what Shenmue did back in the late 90s was cutting-edge stuff that was hard to develop, like the day and night system and weather system. Things that are often done for you nowadays with modern game engines like Unreal, which Shenmue 3 would utilize as it would be using Unreal Engine 4. Modern game engines also just streamline a lot of game development that used to take a lot more time. Along with Shenmue 3 no longer having to be a pioneer in a brand new genre, it's not a stretch to assume that a faithful Shenmue sequel could be made on a tighter budget. YesNet also didn't work on the game completely alone. They had help from Implausible Industries, who specialized with working on Unreal Engine games. It's also important to note that Sega obviously didn't have much involvement with Shenmue 3, considering another company was publishing it. Once again, they had reached a deal where YesNet was free to use the Shenmue IP, but Sega still owned the rights. Although it would still benefit Sega if Shenmue 3 did well, either they could decide to publish the next Shenmue game, or Shenmue 3 could increase the popularity of the brand and encourage sales of other Sega-owned Shenmue projects. So it's likely that in order to bolster the sales of Shenmue 3, and give people introduced to Shenmue through the third game a way to play the previous games, and give Sega money, a Shenmue 1 and 2 remaster was now underway by Sega themselves. Development on the remasters began in October of 2015, only around 4 months after the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter announcement. Being developed by T3T and working off the original source code for Shenmue 1 on Dreamcast and Shenmue 2 for Xbox, it released for PlayStation 4, Xbox One and PC on October 21st, 2018, and for some reason released in Japan a bit later, on November 22nd, 2018. Although the final release would end up being just a simple port with slight enhancements and quality of life changes, the original plan was much grander. Digital Foundry would break the news only around 2 months after the remaster's launch that there was a planned graphics overhaul for the remaster, with brand new assets across the board for environments and NPCs, along with a new lighting engine. Go check out their video, I'll put a link in the description if you want to learn more about it. But the scope of the project changed, likely due to budget or time constraints, and we end up with the product we eventually got, which is still in my opinion the best way to experience the first 2 Shenmue games today. There are still remnants of this original scope in the final version, mainly with the inventory icons. If you pay close attention, you can tell that the images used to depict the items are actually images of remade versions of the models. Have a look at the image of the good luck amulet in the inventory. You can see the ribbon tying it together is fully modeled, whereas if you actually inspect the model, the ribbon is only shown within the texture and isn't actually part of the mesh. How about the duck? You can tell the image of it shows a different colored beak and just looks much more accurate to a real life duck than the in-game model. What about the batteries? The image of them doesn't have the gunk covering the packaging unlike the in-game model. Almost all of the items seem to have more detailed models used for the icons, some are just more noticeable than others, and it's likely only because of the original scope of the project that they bothered to go through the trouble. The remaster also lets you have Japanese or English audio and swap between them whenever you want, along with being able to use your Shenmue 1 save to start Shenmue 2. The only gripe I have is that there's no Shenmue passport for the first game. This would have been a great opportunity to recreate the online component of Shenmue 1, or at the very least reinstate the features that didn't need to require the internet, like Shenmue goodies, NPC backstories, or the save file statistics. Oh well. As for technical issues, most of them would be patched out over time, although I find the game still likes to crash very occasionally, and Shenmue 2 doesn't like it when you reload a save constantly. It's guaranteed to eventually crash doing that. There's also the matter of the audio. For some reason, when converting the dialogue audio to a different format, they accidentally compressed it even more, making it worse than the original releases. Luckily there's a mod on the PC to fix this. But the widescreen high-resolution support, quality of life changes like being able to always skip cutscenes in Shenmue 2, control improvements and nearly instant load times are enough for me to easily consider these the best versions of Shenmue 1 and 2. After the release of the remasters, Shenmue fans didn't have to wait long until they'd get to play Shenmue 3, but there would be some controversy before then. On June 10th, 2019, it would be announced that Shenmue 3 on PC would be an Epic Game Store exclusive, only releasing on Steam a year after launch. Fans were not happy, both because the Epic Games Store had a bad reputation such as lacking many features compared to Steam, and also that PC Kickstarter backers were promised a Steam code, and were now going to receive an EGS code, which isn't what they were promised or paid for. This deal was made without any input from Yu Suzuki or his team. It was all done by Deep Silver, who already had a reputation for taking EGS exclusive deals for its PC game releases. This deal was announced only around 5 months before the game's release. While we're on the topic of Shenmue 3's release date, that was something that kept being pushed back, with the original planned release date of December 2017, then being pushed back to 2018, then again to August 2019, and then finally settling on the 19th of November 2019. When the game launched, it had been 18 years since Shenmue 2's release, but finally there was a new Shenmue game to play, and it was time for Ryo to leave that cave he'd been stuck in for so long. First of all, the environment looks great. Nothing groundbreaking, but it looks really good. You can take some really beautiful screenshots of the scenery. I don't like the screen space reflections used for the water, however. I think they need some tweaking. Whenever the water is situated on the sides of the screen, the reflection turns pure white. I imagine this is basically a bug. Other games with screen space reflections on water don't usually have this issue, and it's really jarring once you notice it. The character models look fine, I think, though I don't like the lack of consistency in the art style. You can tell not everyone working on character models had the same idea of what the art style should be. It's a mix of semi-realistic characters and cartoony ones. But with the graphics, along with many other aspects of the game, it's important to remember the smaller budget and team compared to the first two games are more willing to excuse the little things. There is one thing I can't excuse, however. It's the most baffling thing about the game in my opinion, and I want to get it out of the way. This game has no pause function. That isn't a joke. Oh sure, you can bring up your inventory, which is also how you access the options menu and exit back to the main menu, but this isn't a pause menu. You press the right shoulder button to access this menu. Okay, but why does that matter? So you pause the game with a different button other than the start button. That's not a huge deal. Well, guess what? You can't bring up your inventory when doing anything that isn't free roam, so if you're in a fight or a minigame or a cutscene, you can't bring up your inventory. Okay, maybe the start button will now act as a pause button during these moments. Psych, you just left the activity. Yes, the start button is the quit activity button. If you press it hoping to pause the game, you will prematurely quit whatever it is you're doing. Okay, so is there any way to pause the game during this? Well, you can press Y to bring up the help screen on minigames. That incidentally pauses the game, but if you're watching a cutscene or you're in a fight, there's no way to pause the game. There's no way to pause the game. Now on PC there's a trick to this, at least when it comes to cutscenes. You can press the escape key to quit the game, a menu will pop up warning you that your progress will be lost, which incidentally pauses the game. Just leave it like that and when you come back press B to cancel and you'll return to the game. There's no button on the controller that will accomplish this. You need to be playing on PC and press the escape key. And it's dangerous, you could accidentally press A to confirm and end up losing potentially hours of progress if you hadn't saved in a while. Shenmue 1 and 2 had dedicated pause screens and you could pause at any time during any activity, so why does this game from 2019 not have a proper pause function? Why do we have to rely on things that incidentally pause the game but otherwise exist to serve other functions? Why does the button that would normally pause the game in literally every other game made in the last 25 years do almost the exact opposite function from what the player would reasonably expect? I've got no idea, I'm completely baffled by this. Admittedly it's not a huge deal in the end though. If you use the help screen and the escape key you can pause everything other than fight sequences, but that doesn't excuse the fact that this is completely unacceptable. Did the Kickstarter not reach the pause button milestone? Did the fans not raise enough money to get that implemented? Okay, I'm done. Let's talk about the voice acting. Corey Marshall returns to voice Ryo, and he sounds great. He sounds a little older now, which makes sense, and it's odd to hear his voice in high quality, but I wouldn't want anyone else to voice Ryo in English.
Lan Di, fight me! I will avenge my father!
A lot of characters from the first two games make a return thanks to phone calls. You can call people like Nozomi, Ine-san, Joy, and more. But as far as I can tell, I believe Ryo and Joy are the only characters that have their English voice actors return to voice them. Although the Shenmue Dojo would end up collaborating with Ren and Landi's voice actors to have them return thanks to a fan mod, which I have installed in my footage, not that the replacement actors do a bad job or anything. I believe I know why this is. If you remember when I talked about the English voice acting of Shenmue 1 earlier in this video, I said that all the recording was done in Japan with English-speaking actors who lived in Japan. Well, for Shenmue 3, the sensible thing happened and all the English VO was recorded in America. Corey lives in America, and I believe Joy's voice actress also lives in America now, hence why Joy is the only other character to retain her voice. It would have been a huge cost to get all the other English actors who still live in Japan to fly to America to voice their lines, especially with the tighter budget, so I completely understand why they couldn't return. But of course the Japanese dub was still recorded in Japan, and a majority of the actors returned to voice their characters. As for the newcomers, they all have actual voice acting backgrounds unlike the first two games' English actors, so they are a lot more competent and less funny, although I wouldn't say the acting is phenomenal. I think the dialogue is still translated a little poorly, leaving it feeling a bit stilted and unnatural in places, and the actors have trouble sometimes saying the lines convincingly.
Actually, there's something I wanted to ask you.
Who, me?
Yeah.
You can ask me later. You need another cup.
I don't think it's their fault though. There are some good actors here I recognize from other projects and I know they can provide a good performance. They just don't have very well written lines to work with, and maybe the direction could have been a bit better as well, I don't know. Very rarely there are some obvious mistranslations.
I'm looking for someone named Yuan.
No, I haven't.
Aha! Come to apprentice under me, have you?
Oh, nothing.
It doesn't help that these two examples are right at the start of the game, right next to each other. Instances like this aren't actually that common. As for the core gameplay, it's more Shenmue, and that's all I could really ask for. There's a ton more mini-games than even Shenmue 2 had, along with more jobs and ways to make money. Even the forklift returns from Shenmue 1 as an optional job that pays pretty well. Lucky Hit is back, although you can't get a part-time job with it anymore, and the ball physics are different, with the ball falling slower and bouncing more erratically. There's now fishing, which can be a great way to make money, along with tons of fishing spots, with some being unlocked through side quests. Buying items from shops is more traditional now with a shop menu, but I completely understand why this change was made because there are so many shops and so many items now that trying to make shopping realistic like the prior games would just be unfeasible. Some of these items are pointless, but a lot of them can be traded into a pawn shop within certain sets to obtain move scrolls. And a lot of the items are food/health items which can be useful too. I also just love walking into any shop and being able to buy something. That's what I always wanted with the previous Shenmue games, and it helps you feel like this world actually exists. You can also now customize Ryo's outfit, which is neat. Getting all the clothing items in the game is a feat, but I think I did it. Not sure though, because the game doesn't keep track of anything in regards to completionist things. Side quests are now much more of a thing than they ever were in the previous games, and in true Shenmue style they aren't going to show up in your minimap or anything. You have to find them yourself or look them up online. Which is probably the way to go, since most side quests are only available during certain small sections of the story, which makes the odds of you stumbling across them a lot smaller. Usually your reward for going along with these quests is either a secret fishing spot or a clothing item, or sometimes an item in a pamphlet showing you that it's part of a set to trade in for a move scroll. Alright, enough stalling, it's time to talk about the combat. The combat sucks. I mean, it's not awful, but it's absolutely a downgrade over previous games. They've attempted to streamline the combat for newer players and ditch the Virtua Fighter system, which I don't agree with purely on the basis that no one is starting with Shenmue 3. Yeah, there's a recap movie on the main menu, but I don't think that's enough to convince people to start with the third game. You'd basically just be spoiling the entire story for yourself, so if you do end up liking Shenmue 3, you've kind of ruined your journey through the games. I wouldn't recommend starting with Shenmue 3, and I don't think new players would even consider that in the first place. But back to the combat, it's super simple now. Remember how Shenmue 1 let you perform one move with the push of a button, and then Shenmue 2 removed that feature? Well, now it's back with a vengeance. You can now have 5 moves that you can perform with a single button during a fight. You cycle through the moves you have equipped and then press the right trigger to perform them. No more memorizing move combinations. You can still perform moves with their button combinations if you'd like, but there's really no point and the game actively discourages it. When would 5 moves not be enough for you? Do you also remember how the first 2 Shenmue games weren't really RPGs like they were advertised? The only real RPG element was learning moves and training them, which were both aspects of the game you could completely ignore if you wanted to. Well, Shenmue 3 is an RPG through and through. You need to grind, and that isn't an optional thing like it was before. So if you want to beat the game, you need to train with 1-inch punch, horse stance, and rooster steps to raise your HP, then learn and train moves to level them up, and in turn leveling up your attack stat in the process. If you don't do this, then you will get your ass handed to you. You can also heal during a fight a maximum of 4 times with the Snake Power healing item. You train moves by sparring. You have the move you want to train as one of your 5 moves, then you need to input the move's button combination over and over again to train the move to max level, which thankfully doesn't take nearly as long as the previous games, taking only around 3 minutes or so. The only things I actually like about the combat is 1. The ragdoll physics can be funny at times. 2. Locking on the different enemies is actually a thing now. There's an icon showing what enemy you're locked onto, and you can move the right stick to lock onto a different enemy. And 3 is how the game is set up around you exploring, playing minigames, doing side quests and buying items to acquire new moves. And you will need to find new moves to beat the game, since maxing out moves is the only way to increase your attack stat. Overall, I don't like how Shenmue 3 now forces an RPG-like grind on players, and the combat itself is boiled down to finding 1 to 5 moves you like and pressing a single button to perform them over and over again. Yeah, the original game's combat could be clunky and dated at times, but at least there was depth there for people to explore if they wanted to. And guess what? Shenmue 3's combat still feels clunky and dated, only it's super simple and lacks any and all depth now. Oh, and there are also no grab moves, apparently because they didn't have enough time with the motion capture equipment to make it happen. But at the end of the day, it works. The combat was never the main course when it comes to Shenmue for me, and I've made a case earlier in this video that combat was never the main focus from a game design point of view either. It's playable and it's not horrible, just bland and lacking. But there's one aspect of the game that redeems some of my criticism with the grinding. New Game Plus. Yes, finally, Shenmue 3 has a legit, proper New Game Plus mode. You keep all your items, stats, money, moves, clothes, everything. You can even choose to start your new game in the second location. New Game Plus saved Shenmue 3 for me. Without it, I'd probably say that Shenmue 3 is a must-play for all Shenmue fans, but that it was probably a game I wouldn't return to very often. But thanks to it, it's the Shenmue game I've returned to the most, actually. When Shenmue 3 first came out, I beat it around 4 or 5 times in a row. I kept wanting to see what I'd missed, try to do more side quests, make more money, find more moves, find more clothing items, and everything I did would carry on forever into all my future playthroughs, all without needing to grind ever again. Shenmue 3 comes alive with New Game Plus. It redeems the game's replayability. And being able to start in the second location is great because that's the best part of the game by far for me. You see, you start in Bailu Village. It's a small remote village with not a lot going on. They still have an arcade, which I find funny. I think the odds are pretty low that a super remote Chinese village that requires a 2 to 3 day hike in the mountains to access would have an arcade, especially in 1987. But whatever, I'm actually glad it's here. Bailu Village seems to want to replicate Shenmue 1, with its smaller size and more personable NPCs, but Shenmue 3 doesn't have the budget or unregulated ambition to pull off a Shenmue 1 styled experience. There's still lots of detail here, but not nearly to the scale of Shenmue 1. The NPCs all have names and some of them do have schedules, but most NPCs stay in one place for most, if not all of the day. It just doesn't have that real world feeling anymore. Bailu isn't a bad portion of the game, but it does lack a lot of the replayability that the second location, Niaowu, offers. Niaowu is trying to replicate Shenmue 2 with its scale, lots of things to find and lots of things to do. Shenmue 3 shines brightest when it's trying to replicate Shenmue 2 versus Shenmue 1. And this location really shines and holds up best to multiple playthroughs. Also, going around looking for Chobu-chans in all of the stores is actually really fun, and a great way to get you to look at every little bit of detail around Niaowu, leading to you unlocking moves if you trade in sets of shop cards. There's one more new gameplay feature I've neglected to mention. Yo's health is always going down. Yeah, his health meter is also called a stamina meter, and it goes down while running around, and will also go down on its own when sparring and of course when taking damage in combat. This is why health items are so important. Even if you somehow never get hit, you're going to still need health items even when not engaging with the combat at all. This is a controversial feature, but I kind of understand why it's here. It's another thing bringing purpose to all the shops and items that Shenmue 3 introduces, while also being more realistic that Yo needs to eat throughout the day, but ultimately I don't like it. I've never been a fan of stamina meters or hunger meters in games. I just don't like needing to keep track of meters and using items just because the game is forcing me to keep track of it. I'd rather have more organic gameplay than the game simply tapping me on the shoulder every so often to perform a constant and repetitive task throughout my playtime. In the end, what does this accomplish? It only serves to frustrate first-time players since they will likely be low on money and food for the first few hours, and keeping on top of that can be frustrating when there are already other things you need money for. And for players like me with tons of food and money, it's just a small constant annoyance. It isn't really fun. But again, like most of the issues I have with Shenmue 3, it doesn't bring the game down too much, and I guess Shenmue has always been about trying to capture realism. I just think this is a little bit of an overreach.
How about some hot ice cream then?
Huh?
Just kidding! There's no such thing as hot ice cream! You fell for it. You're funny, mister.
Uh-huh.
Want to talk about the new music? That's kind of a trick question because a lot of the music isn't new. So much music was made for Shenmue 1 and 2 that a lot of it went unused and shows up here in Shenmue 3, along with a lot of returning songs being used in places. There are a decent amount of brand new tracks from what I can tell, and the returning songs sound great as they are no longer constrained by hardware or file size limits. You can walk into the music shop in Niaowu and listen to Joy's theme, and now it's the full song with a sick guitar solo. But wait, what about the story? Well, it's okay. Again, I've never thought the story in Shenmue was ever great, and Shenmue 3 doesn't change my mind on that front. The only complaint I have that I didn't have for the first two games is how little the story progresses after all is said and done, just comparing how much happened in Shenmue 2 versus Shenmue 3, and it's night and day. My theory is that the story would have progressed a lot more, but the third location, Baisha, was cut from the game. I'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the beta breakdown section. But yeah, Shenmue 3 progresses the story a little bit, but not very much, and of course Yu Suzuki stated that he had 5 or 6 games planned for Shenmue, so even if Shenmue 4 happens, that still might not wrap up the story, though ideally I think it should. Shenmue 4 may or may not happen, but I think Shenmue 5 is almost certainly not happening, and certainly not Shenmue 6. Now is when I'd start to wrap up this review, but wait, this is a modern game release. That means DLC. Yes, let's talk about the 3 DLCs that released for this game. First up is Battle Rally, the only DLC you access from the main menu like a separate game mode. It's fun, you basically have to defeat enemies and speedrun some linear beat-em-up levels to survive and get the best time. You can also play as Ren and Kung Fu Lady I forgot the name of. Every character has different equipped moves that make them different to play. Being able to play as characters other than Ryo is also definitely a first for the series, so that's cool. You can also eventually unlock Chobu-chan as a fighter. This is neat. Another aspect of Battle Rally is finding Bailu-chans around Bailu Village, just like finding Chobu-chans around Niaowu. After you've done all this, you permanently unlock items for the main game, even on brand new saves, mostly clothes, some moves and healing items, along with earning buffs to make the actual Battle Rally easier. Overall, I like Battle Rally. Adding the speedrunning element and encouraging people to get the best time on each stage certainly makes the lackluster combat more interesting. Next up is the Story DLC. This adds a new long side quest to Niaowu involving an old familiar face from Shenmue 2, and the return of Chawan signs. There are a lot of Chawan signs in this DLC, and they even added secret items that you can receive by doing a secret sign at a certain store during each Chawan sign section. That's kinda cool, but you need to look it up online because how would you know to do a secret combination at a certain location? One problem I do have with it is how easy it is to accidentally prevent yourself from finishing it. You see, there are points all throughout this DLC where it makes you progress in the main story a bit more before it'll let you do the next phase of the DLC, so you end up beating the DLC near the end of the game, but if you get too close to the end of the game you'll fail the DLC, even before the actual proper finale has started. So you'll either have to load an old save file, or if you don't have one, then restart from the beginning with New Game Plus. I think this should just be a warning if you're about to progress the story too far that if you continue you'll fail the DLC. It's just really easy to do on accident since you have to get close to the end of the game to trigger the end of the DLC to begin with, but you can't get too close to the end or you'll fail. Overall, this DLC is fine. It gives you a bit of extra content and is inoffensive, but isn't crucial or mind-blowing in any way. Oh wait, finishing this DLC is the only way to unlock the only outfit you can have Shenhua wear. 10 out of 10. And lastly is the Big Merry Cruise DLC. This adds a gambling boat to Niaowu, adding more gambling opportunities and clothing items to earn with tickets from daily challenges. There's also 2 side quests here that are memorable. The only thing I don't like about it is how the boat will appear in some cutscenes around the harbour, in shots where it obviously wasn't there when they were making the cutscene, with the way it just takes up the entire background sometimes. Overall though, I like it. I think all the DLCs are kind of underwhelming though, outside of maybe Battle Rally. I do like all 3 DLCs, but they aren't essential at all, so if you're in a situation where you have to be smart with your money, the DLCs can be easily skipped, but if you know what you're getting, they are fine and inoffensive, and make Shenmue 3 feel a little more complete. Anyway, let's wrap up this review. The game ends after Ryo gets his ass handed to him by Lan Di, and the English version of the game has a big mistranslation in one of the final cutscenes. Ryo says, "That's the place we found the scroll," when he's supposed to say, "That's the place depicted on the scroll."
The cliff temple that Zhao visited.
That's where we found the scroll.
Yeah, I don't remember Ryo ever being in a mountain temple, and the place we found the scroll was in an old woman's house back in Bailu Village. So that's Shenmue 3. I like it. New Game Plus really saved this game for me and made it just as replayable as Shenmue 2 in my eyes. Does it have its problems? Yes, for sure, and I've highlighted them, but it doesn't distract from the overall experience too much and it still feels like Shenmue. I don't think it's a bad game, and for fans of the series, I think it does a decent job recapturing a little bit of the magic of the first two games. I give Shenmue 3 a 7 out of 10. And now it's time for Beta Breakdown. First up, Baisha, the cut third location, was promised in the Kickstarter. It would have apparently showcased different gameplay from the first two locations, instead providing strategic gameplay, whatever that means. However, because the third location was promised, the final section of the game that takes place in the old castle is the promised third location. It's why there's a capsule toy machine, a pawn shop, and a side quest awkwardly shoehorned into that section. There was also gameplay shown of the Great Wall of China, but in the final game it only appears in an FMV that plays at the end of the game. There was also going to be an RC Forklift minigame. We know thanks to an unused music track in the game files titled RC Forklift, as well as I believe the same song again but titled RC Boat. There's also this early screenshot which might be the minigame, though that's certainly the same model as the forklift toy a kid has in one of the side quests in the final game. Alright, what else? Joe's back jacket decal used to be too high up. You can always use that to tell when an image is from the beta because it seemingly wasn't fixed until right before release. And that concludes Beta Breakdown. Now back to our timeline. So Shenmue 3 came out and was a massive success, right? Well, not really it seems. Deep Silver stated publicly that the game performed below expectations, though I'm leaning towards that being because they had too high expectations. Before I continue, I should state that the information I'm about to provide is rumor. There's nothing concrete about most of what I'm going to say here, so take it with a huge grain of salt. I saw an old post on the Shenmue Dojo forums that was soon removed by the user who posted it for unknown reasons. I wasn't the only person who saw this post, by the way. Any big Shenmue fan who was clued in at the time may remember this post. In the post, the user claimed to talk to an employee of Deep Silver at some sort of convention, and that their friendly discussion turned towards the topic of Shenmue 3. The employee also advised that this talk be strictly off the books. The employee mentioned that Shenmue 3 did turn a profit for Deep Silver, but stated that it was solely because of the Epic Games deal. He also said that YSNet had pitched Shenmue 4 to them, but they turned it down after the poor sales of Shenmue 3. The current rumor is that YSNet is still in the process of pitching Shenmue 4 to different publishers, showing off a little bit of the cut Great Wall and Baisha sections of Shenmue 3 that would now instead appear in Shenmue 4. But even if Shenmue 4 has yet to be confirmed, that wouldn't be the only thing Shenmue fans had left to look forward to. On the 5th of September 2020, Crunchyroll announced during their virtual Crunchyroll Expo that an anime adaptation of the Shenmue series was in production, titled Shenmue the Animation. It would be a joint collaboration between Crunchyroll and Adult Swim, with Japanese audio only being available on Crunchyroll and the English dub only available on Adult Swim. Yu Suzuki would be executive producer and was apparently very hands-on during production. The anime was in production for around 2 to 3 years, which took place primarily during Shenmue 3's development. From an interview I found with the anime's producer, Yu Kiyozono, translated by Phantom Riverstone once again, it would seem it was the producer's idea to make a Shenmue anime and approached Sega and Yu Suzuki to try to make it happen. It's worth noting that the animation studio behind this project, Telecom Animation Film, and Sega, are both owned by the same company, Sega Sammy Holdings. The Japanese dub has lots of returning actors from the games reprising their roles, however the English dub has absolutely no returning actors, which is pretty disappointing. The first episode premiered on February 6, 2022, and the series would air a total of 13 episodes, the final of which premiering on May 1st, 2022. As for my opinion, I think the anime was pretty awesome, speaking as a Shenmue fan of course. The pacing is a lot faster given how the 13 episodes span the entirety of Shenmue 1 and 2, although I think the pacing of the Yokosuka section of the anime is pretty good, certainly light years faster than the game, but discounting that I think the story moves along at a good pace. Once Dio leaves for Hong Kong though, I do think the pacing gets a little too fast at times. The story jumps from scene to scene pretty rapidly, although I don't think it's too much of a problem. But it certainly gives the anime a completely different feel from the games, as they were all about being slow and immersive, and the anime is all about getting you through the story in 13 episodes. I think having a few more episodes would have been beneficial, but then you run the risk of losing people's attention. Plus I'm just happy this anime happened at all. It doesn't feel right to suggest we should have gotten more episodes. As for the writing, I think it's way better than the games in my opinion. I mentioned earlier in this video that I think Shenmue's story is just good to okay, and serves the purpose of moving things along and getting to new locations to explore. The anime though does a great job of giving characters more personality, character growth and character arcs, and overall making characters more expressive. For example, one thing the anime does that I love is making Ryo touch his bandage on his face when he's thinking about the trauma of his dad's death, or reminding himself why he's on his quest for revenge. The anime also explains how he got the bandage, by having it be an injury he receives from Lan Di during their fateful encounter. These two changes are great, and already give Ryo a ton more depth, and a visual indicator on what he's thinking without needing to spell it out. The anime does a lot of things like this. There are even some extra details surrounding the backstory of a certain character that I won't spoil. Also, the music is fantastic. It's all new music that sounds like it could have been in the original games, and pretty much any song that plays during a fight scene sounds awesome. The animation itself looks great when it comes to backgrounds, although characters themselves can go off model at times, and there are 3D CGI characters in the backgrounds that look awful. But again, I can't complain too much. I doubt this anime had much of a budget, and for the most part it looks good. Overall, I think the anime tells the story of Shenmue 1 and 2 really well, maybe even better than the original games. It moves a lot of things around, adds new scenes, removes others, so if you've played the games it's not going to be like watching all the cutscenes all over again. There are differences everywhere. I think it's a great adaptation, and if it gets more people to play Shenmue then that's even better, although I still think you should play the games first before watching the anime. I give Shenmue the animation an 8 out of 10. Now we are right near the end of the video, but we've got just one more thing to talk about. On June 24th, 2022, YSNet released a brand new game, Air Twister, a spiritual successor to Space Harrier. It released for Apple devices exclusively through Apple Arcade. I'll give the game this, it forced me to learn what the hell an Apple Arcade is. It's basically a subscription service that gives you access to a large library of games for your Apple devices. Air Twister looks alright, I think. I'll be honest, I've never been the biggest fan of Space Harrier. Even when playing Shenmue I always gravitated towards Hang-On and Outrun. And I also don't own any Apple devices and don't care enough about this game to pick up a cheap second-hand iPhone or iPad to play it. It seems Yu Suzuki approached Apple about the prospect of YSNet making a game for Apple Arcade, and it probably served its purpose of keeping the lights on for YSNet as they try to make Shenmue 4 a reality. I've heard people suggest that maybe Air Twister will appear as an arcade machine in Shenmue 4, and I think that's a fun idea, but who knows. And finally folks, that's the end of this episode of Every Game. I commend you for making it all the way to the end. Thanks again to everyone who helped me out, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next video. And that's really all there is to say. Yu Suzuki and his team quietly worked on bringing the rest of the Shenmue experience to the people. And on Shenmue 6, 2001...